My hands trembled with silent rage as I watched my sister Chloe smirk at me from across the mahogany dining table. "The garage is ready for you," my mother, Beatrice, announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness, while the rest of the family erupted in laughter. For 5 years I had hidden my empire, enduring their mockery and their pity. I watched my sister's husband, Gavin, pour another glass of vintage wine, completely unaware that the phone in his pocket was about to explode with messages from the mysterious CEO he feared more than anyone on Wall Street. They thought they were banishing a failure to the freezing cold. They did not know they were locking the door on the woman who owned the bank holding their mortgage. I am Dominique, 35 years old, and for a decade I have been the family disappointment. While my sister was groomed to be the trophy wife and the corporate darling, I was the black sheep who refused to straighten her hair or follow the path my mother laid out. But tonight, the thermometer was dropping, and so was my patience. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to hide your true success, just to see who really loves you. The drive to Sag Harbor had been treacherous. A blizzard was hammering the East Coast, turning the winding roads of the Hamptons into sheets of black ice. I could have taken my helicopter. I could have been driven in the back of my armored SUV with heated seats and a partition to separate me from the driver. Instead, I was behind the wheel of a rented Toyota Corolla that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. This car was my costume. It was the armor I wore when I visited my family, a necessary prop to maintain the illusion that I was Dominique, the struggling freelancer, the one who barely scraped by, the one who needed their charity. As I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of my parents' estate, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The house was magnificent, a sprawling colonial mansion illuminated by thousands of tasteful white Christmas lights. It looked like a postcard for the American dream. My father Lionel had bought this place 20 years ago, a symbol that we had made it. But for me, this house had never been a home. It was a museum where I was expected to be a silent exhibit, perfect and polished. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat. I had packed light, just a few changes of clothes and the gifts I had carefully selected. My boots crunched against the fresh snow as I walked up the long driveway. Through the bay windows, I could see the golden glow of the chandelier and the silhouettes of people moving inside. They looked warm. They looked happy. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance I was about to give, and rang the doorbell. It took a long time for anyone to answer. When the heavy oak door finally swung open, it was not a warm embrace that greeted me, but the critical gaze of my mother, Beatrice. She stood there in a floor-length emerald silk gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. She looked impeccable as always. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over me from head to toe, lingering with distaste on my hair. I was wearing box braids, neatly styled and pulled back, but to Beatrice they were a sign of defiance. "You are late," she said, not moving to let me in immediately. The wind whipped snow against my face, but she didn't seem to notice. "And look at you. Dominique, we have guests. Important guests. I explicitly told you to do something with your hair. You look like you just walked out of a music video from the 90s. It is unprofessional." I forced a smile, the cold already seeping through my coat. "Hello to you too, Mother. It is good to see you. The roads were bad." She finally stepped aside, allowing me to step into the foyer. The heat hit me instantly, smelling of cinnamon, expensive perfume, and roasting turkey. But the emotional temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees the moment I crossed the threshold. "Don't track slush on the marble," Beatrice snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my boots. "I just had the floors polished. Leave your bag there. And for heaven's sake, take off that coat. It looks like something you found in a donation bin." I did as I was told, placing my wet boots on the rubber mat by the door. As I straightened up, I heard a booming, jovial voice approaching from the living room. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence." Gavin, my sister's husband, walked into the foyer holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He was a tall man with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in his entire life. He wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the car I had driven here. His face was flushed with drink and his blue eyes sparkled with a malicious kind of amusement. "We were taking bets on whether you would make it," Gavin said, leaning against the archway. "I told Chloe not to worry. I said, you know Dominique, she operates on her own time zone. What do they call it? CP time." He laughed loudly at his own joke, expecting me to join in. It was a racist trope, the idea that black people are chronically late, and coming from my white brother-in-law, it stung with particular venom. He felt comfortable saying it because he knew my family would never correct him. To them, Gavin was the prize. He was the VP at a major financial firm, the man who had elevated our family's status even further. I stiffened my hands, clenching at my sides. "The roads were icy, Gavin. It has nothing to do with stereotypes." "Oh, lighten up," Beatrice interjected, linking her arm through Gavin's. "He is just teasing you, Dominique. You have always been too sensitive. That is why you struggle in the corporate world. You have to learn to take a joke." "Come, Gavin, let's go back to the party. The Millers are waiting." They turned their backs on me, leaving me standing alone in the foyer. I could hear the murmur of conversation from the living room, the clinking of glasses. I took a moment to compose myself. I was the owner of Aurora Ventures. I controlled assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I could buy Gavin's company and dismantle it for parts before breakfast. I repeated these facts to myself like a mantra, calming the storm inside me. I walked into the living room. It was crowded. My sister Chloe was holding court by the fireplace, looking radiant in a red velvet dress. Beside her were Gavin's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, an older couple who radiated old money and polite condescension. My father Lionel sat in his armchair, looking tired and smaller than I remembered. "Hey everyone," I said, trying to inject some warmth into my voice. The conversation paused. Chloe glanced at me, her eyes flicking over my simple beige sweater and dark jeans. "Oh, hi, Dom," she said, her tone breezy and dismissive. "You made it. We barely saved any appetizers. You know how the Millers love crab cakes." I walked over to give my father a kiss on the cheek. He patted my hand awkwardly, his eyes darting to my mother as if asking for permission to be kind. "Good to see you, Pumpkin," he whispered. I turned to the dining room where the table was already set for dinner. It was a masterpiece of holiday decor with gold chargers, crystal stemware, and an elaborate floral centerpiece. I counted the chairs. 8 chairs. There was my parents' usual spots at the heads of the table. 2 seats for Gavin and Chloe, 2 seats for the Millers, and 2 seats occupied by another couple I didn't recognize, neighbors from down the street who were apparently invited last minute. I frowned, doing the math again. I walked around the table looking for my name card. It wasn't there. "Mom," I called out softly, trying not to make a scene. "Where am I sitting?" Beatrice glided over, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked at the table, then at me, feigning surprise. "Oh. Well, we had a bit of a situation, Dominique. The Millers decided to stay for dinner at the last minute, and the Hendersons popped over. The table only seats 8 comfortably." I stared at her. "So what does that mean? I drove 4 hours through a blizzard to get here." Chloe chimed in from the sofa, sipping her wine. "Don't be dramatic, Dom. We can't exactly ask Mr. and Mrs. Miller to eat on their laps, can we? They are guests." Gavin chuckled. "Yeah, and honestly, Dom, you wouldn't fit in the conversation anyway. We're discussing the market and the merger. Pretty high-level stuff. You would be bored to tears." The humiliation burned my cheeks. It wasn't just about the seat. It was the message. I was displaceable. I was the afterthought. "So where am I supposed to eat?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "In the kitchen," Beatrice sighed, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "The kitchen is full of catering staff, Dominique. You would just be in the way. Besides, I thought you would appreciate some privacy. You always act so uncomfortable around our friends." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "We prepared the space above the garage for you. It is fully furnished. I had the maid put some leftovers on a tray. You can relax out there, watch your little shows on your phone, and we will see you for gifts in the morning. The garage. Not the guest room. Not even the sofa in the den. The garage. Mom, it is 10 degrees outside, I said, disbelief coloring my tone. The garage is detached. It's freezing. Oh, stop it. Beatrice snapped, her mask of civility slipping. There is a space heater out there. It might be a little temperamental, but you are young and tough. You are used to rougher conditions, aren't you? With your lifestyle. She meant my imaginary poverty. She thought she was sending a broke freelancer to a place she deserved. Chloe laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. Consider it a glamping adventure, sis. It builds character. Plus, your hair will probably hold up better in the humidity out there. Gavin raised his glass in a mock toast. To the garage. The penthouse of the suburbs. The room erupted in laughter again. Even the Millers smiled politely, though they looked away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. My father looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. I looked at them. I looked at the family that was supposed to be my sanctuary. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not a loud, violent snap, but a quiet, irreversible severance. Fine, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I picked up my bag. I will go to the garage. Beatrice looked relieved. Good. Don't make a face, Dominique. It is Christmas Eve. Let's not ruin it with your attitude. I turned and walked to the back door. As I opened it, the icy wind hit me like a physical blow, biting through my sweater. I stepped out into the dark, snow-covered path that led to the garage. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of the door being locked and the bolt sliding into place. They had locked me out. I trudged through the snow, my boots sinking deep into the drifts. The garage loomed ahead, a dark, separate structure away from the main house. I climbed the rickety wooden stairs to the studio apartment above the car bays. When I opened the door, the air inside was stagnant and frigid. I could see my breath in the dim light. I flipped the switch and a single bare bulb flickered on. The furnished space was a lie. There was a lumpy mattress on the floor with a thin wool blanket, a rusted folding chair, and a small table with a paper plate covered in foil. I walked over to the space heater in the corner and plugged it in. Nothing. I jiggled the cord. A spark, a sputter, and then silence. It was dead. I stood in the center of the freezing room, shivering uncontrollably. Through the small, grime-streaked window, I could see the main house. The dining room was bathed in warm golden light. I saw Gavin standing at the head of the table making a toast. I saw my mother laughing, her head thrown back. I saw my sister smiling, basking in the attention. They were warm. They were full. And they had erased me. I sat down on the freezing mattress, pulling my coat tighter around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with numb fingers. It was a notification from my chief technology officer. Subject Sterling Corp acquisition. Status complete. You are now the majority shareholder. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face in the darkness. A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. They thought they had sent a beggar to the garage. They didn't realize they had just declared war on the boss. I opened my banking app, then my secure email server. I typed a message to my legal team, my fingers flying across the screen. Execute Phase 1 immediately, and get me the file on Gavin Miller's Q3 audit. I want everything. The cold was still biting at my skin, but inside I was burning up. I looked out the window at the happy family one last time. Enjoy your dinner, I whispered to the glass, because it is the last meal you will ever enjoy in this house. The garage was not just a building, it was a verdict. The air inside was so cold it felt solid, pressing against my skin like a heavy, damp blanket. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, my breath pluming in front of me in white, ghostly clouds. The space heater sat in the corner, a useless block of metal that mocked me with its silence. I pulled my coat tighter, burying my chin in the collar, but the chill had already settled into my bones. It was a physical pain, a sharp ache in my joints, but it was nothing compared to the hollow, gnawing sensation in my chest. I turned my gaze to the window, the only source of light in this dark, dusty exile. Through the grime and the swirling snow, the main house glowed like a lantern. It looked magical, almost unearthly in its perfection. I could see the silhouette of the Christmas tree, towering and majestic, adorned with ornaments that probably cost more than most people's cars. I saw the movement of shadows, the animated gestures of my family and their guests. I saw my mother Beatrice throwing her head back in laughter, her hand resting lightly on Chloe's arm. They looked like a tableau from a magazine, the picture-perfect African-American family living the dream in the Hamptons. But I knew the rot that lived beneath the floorboards. I knew because I was the one who had spent my life trying to scrub it away, only to be banished for my efforts. This cold was familiar. It reminded me of the emotional winter I had lived in for the last decade. My mind drifted back, carried on the bitter wind to 10 years ago. That was when the lines were drawn, etched into the bedrock of our family dynamic with a chisel of cruelty. It started with the mirror, or rather my mother's reflection in it standing next to mine and Chloe's. Even when we were children, the distinction was made clear. Chloe was the sun radiant and light. Her skin was the color of caramel, her hair loose and curly, the kind of features that made my mother beam with pride, because they fit her narrow definition of acceptable blackness. I was different. My skin was rich, deep mahogany, dark and undeniable. My hair defied gravity, thick and coily. I remembered a summer afternoon when I was 12. I wanted to go play tennis with the neighbors. My mother had grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. "You stay in the shade, Dominique," she had hissed, her voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "You are dark enough as it is. We do not need you looking like you have been working in the fields." Then she had turned to Chloe, smoothing down her sister's lighter hair. "Go on, Chloe. The sun looks beautiful on you." That was the seed. But the tree of resentment truly flourished 10 years ago. I was 25, fresh out of university, with a full scholarship to Wharton for my MBA. I was on fire, ready to conquer the world. I had plans, I had dreams. I was going to be the CEO my father never had the ruthless streak to be. Then Dad got sick. It wasn't just a flu, it was a massive heart attack that nearly killed him. He survived, but his ability to run the family business did not. And with his health, the family finances collapsed. We were leveraged to the hilt. The mortgage on the Sag Harbor house, the loans for the cars, the credit card debt, my mother accrued to maintain appearances, it all came crashing down. We were weeks away from foreclosure. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the piles of red overdue notices spread out like a losing hand of cards. My mother was weeping not for my father's health, but for the shame of losing the house. "What will the neighbors think?" she had wailed. "I cannot be seen moving into a rental, Dominique. I will die." So I made the choice that killed the old Dominique and birthed the woman sitting in this freezing garage. I quietly declined the scholarship to Wharton. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't make a scene. I simply wrote the letter, withdrew my acceptance, and went to work. I didn't take a corporate job because I needed cash immediately, cash under the table, cash that could keep the lights on day to day while I figured out the bigger picture. I waited tables at a diner during the day and cleaned offices at night. I scrubbed toilets. I took orders from people who didn't have half my IQ. I handed every single cent to my mother. I saved the house. I paid the arrears. I negotiated with the creditors, using a fake voice on the phone, pretending to be a high-powered attorney to buy us time. I worked myself to the bone, sleeping 4 hours a night, my hands chapped and bleeding from harsh cleaning chemicals. And how did Beatrice repay me? I remember coming home one morning after a double shift, exhausted, smelling of fryer grease. My mother was having tea with Mrs. Johnson from the church. I walked in, trying to get to my room unnoticed. "Oh, there she is," Mrs. Johnson had said. "Dominique, we were just talking about you. It is such a shame about Wharton." I froze. I looked at my mother. Beatrice didn't even blink. She took a sip of her tea and sighed, a sound of long-suffering martyrdom. Yes, it was heartbreaking, Beatrice said, her voice smooth as silk. The pressure was just too much for her, I am afraid. She had a bit of a breakdown. The academic rigor isn't for everyone. We thought it best she come home and find herself. We are just letting her take some time to do simple work, less stress. She lied. She looked that woman in the eye and erased my sacrifice. She turned my heroism into failure. She painted me as the weak, incompetent daughter who couldn't hack it in the Ivy League, rather than the savior who was scrubbing floors to keep the roof over her head. When Mrs. Johnson left, I confronted her. I was shaking with rage. "Why did you say that?" I screamed. "I gave up everything for you." Beatrice had looked at me, her expression cold and unyielding. "Nobody needs to know we are broke, Dominique. It is better they think you are slow than think we are poor. Besides, look at you. You fit the part. You always looked like you belonged in a service uniform more than a boardroom anyway." That was the moment the ice entered my heart. I realized then that to my mother, I was not a daughter. I was a utility. I was a darker, less valuable version of her legacy, useful only for labor, while Chloe was the show pony to be paraded. I looked down at my hands now in the dim light of the garage. They were manicured and soft, no longer the hands of a cleaner. But the memory of that bleach smell still made me nauseous. From that day on, I stopped sharing my life with them. I moved out into a tiny apartment. I started investing the few dollars I had left over. I taught myself coding. I studied the markets with a hunger that scared me. I built Aurora Ventures from a laptop in a basement, driven by a singular burning need to prove that I was not just the help. I was the architect. And they never knew. To them, I was still Dominique, the failure, the freelancer, the one who scraped by. I let them believe it. It was safer. If they knew I had money, they would drain me dry. But more importantly, I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer. And tonight I had my answer. They were people who would let me freeze. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against my thigh. The sound was loud in the silence of the garage. I pulled it out, my fingers stiff from the cold. It was a message from Sarah, my executive assistant. She was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my plan, and she was loyal to a fault. I unlocked the screen. The brightness stung my eyes, but the words were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Transaction complete. The wire transfer has cleared. You officially own 51% of Sterling Corporation. The board has been notified. We are ready to execute the leadership restructure at your command." I read it twice, then a third time. 51%. I didn't just have a seat at the table. I owned the table. I owned the chairs. I owned the building the table sat in. I looked up from the phone and through the window again. My eyes locked on Gavin. He was standing near the fireplace, holding a crystal flute of champagne high in the air. He was saying something, his mouth moving in a wide, confident grin. My father was clapping. Beatrice was beaming, looking at Gavin with the adoration she had never shown me. Gavin was toasting to his future. He was toasting to his bonus, his promotion, his cleverness. He was standing in a suit he probably charged to the company account, drinking wine he couldn't afford, celebrating a career that as of 30 seconds ago was effectively over. He had no idea that the woman he had just sent to sleep in a freezing garage was now his boss. He had no idea that the freelancer he mocked for being on CP time had just executed a hostile takeover faster than he could finish his drink. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a jagged, sharp sound like ice cracking. I stood up. The cold didn't bother me anymore. I felt hot. I felt electric. I walked over to the dusty mirror hanging on the garage wall. I looked at myself. I saw the braids my mother hated. I saw the dark skin she tried to hide. And I saw the eyes of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "I am not the help," I whispered to my reflection. "I am the reckoning." I looked back at the house. Gavin was taking a sip of his champagne. "Enjoy it, Gavin," I thought. That is the taste of a man who still thinks he matters. I tapped the screen of my phone, typing a reply to Sarah. Do not announce the takeover yet. Let him enjoy his Christmas Eve dinner. But send the file on the Q3 audit to my personal server and tell the legal team to be on standby. I want to deliver the news in person. I sat back down on the mattress, but I didn't lay down. I watched them. I watched them eat them. I watched them laugh. I was the ghost at their feast, the monster in the dark, the unseen force that was about to level their entire world. The garage was freezing, yes. But revenge. Revenge was going to be warm. It was going to be scorching, and I was ready to burn it all down. The silence of the garage was shattered not by the wind outside, but by the heavy creak of the wooden stairs. I had barely finished replying to my assistant when the door swung open, letting in a swirl of snow and the overpowering scent of expensive scotch and designer perfume. It was an olfactory assault that clashed violently with the smell of mildew and gasoline that permeated my temporary prison. Gavin and Chloe stood in the doorway, framed by the swirling white flakes like a grotesque holiday greeting card. My sister was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, but she refused to put on a coat. She wanted to be seen. She was wearing a floor-length crimson silk dress that clung to her body, a garment I instantly recognized from the latest runway collection. It retailed for $4,000. I also knew, thanks to my access to the family credit reports, that the card she used to buy it was currently $2,000 over its limit. She was wearing debt, draping herself in financial ruin, and calling it fashion. Well, isn't this cozy? Chloe said, stepping into the room and wrinkling her nose as she looked around. She picked her way across the stained concrete floor in her stilettos, as if she were walking through a minefield. It really is a bit rustic, isn't it, Dom? But I suppose it suits you. You have always been more outdoorsy. Gavin followed her in, kicking the door shut behind him. He was holding a bottle of wine and 3 glasses, though he had clearly already emptied a few before coming out here. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red, and his eyes were glassy. We brought you some warmth, Gavin announced, his voice booming in the small space. He held up the bottle. It is a Pinot Noir. Decent stuff. Probably a bit complex for your palate, considering you are used to box wine, but we didn't want you to feel left out of the toast. I remained seated on the mattress, pulling my coat tighter around my legs. I did not stand up. I did not offer them a seat. There were no seats to offer anyway, save for the rusted folding chair Gavin was already eyeing with suspicion. Thank you, I said, my voice flat. To what do I owe the honor of this visit? I thought I was banished until morning. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Chloe said finally, leaning against the workbench, careful not to let the grease touch her silk. We just wanted to check on you. Make sure you haven't frozen to death. Mom would be terribly upset if the police had to come on Christmas morning. It would ruin the brunch photos. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Then she tilted her head, looking at me with a pity that felt like acid. You know, Dom, I was talking to Gavin earlier. We really are worried about you. This whole freelancer thing. It is not sustainable. Look at you. You look tired. You look worn out. I am fine, Chloe, I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. Are you? She countered, raising an eyebrow. Because sleeping in a garage suggests otherwise. Look, I don't want to sound harsh, but maybe it is time to swallow your pride. Gavin says the cleaning crew at his office is looking for people. It is night shift work, so you wouldn't have to interact with the corporate staff. You could just come in, empty the bins, wipe the floors, and go. It comes with benefits after 6 months. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. She was offering me a job cleaning the offices of a company I now owned. She wanted me to scrub the toilets in a building where my name was about to be on the deed. That is very generous of you, I said, forcing the words out through grit teeth. But I think I will pass. Suit yourself. Gavin chimed in, pouring wine into a glass and handing it to me. I took it only to have something to hold. Something to keep my hands from shaking with rage. But seriously, Dom, you should listen to her. The economy is shifting. You have no idea what is coming. He took a long swig of his wine and began to pace the small room, gesturing with his free hand. He was entering lecture mode. This was his favorite pastime, explaining the world to the poor, ignorant relation. See people like you. You live day to day. Gavin started leaning against the cold wall. You don't see the macro trends. I work in high finance dom. I see the flows of capital. We are looking at a market correction that is going to wipe out the little guys. Freelancers. You will be the first to starve. He paused for effect, waiting for me to ask a question to look impressed. I simply took a small sip of the wine. It was oxidized. He had brought me the open bottle that had been sitting out too long. Go on, I said softly. Tell me about the market, Gavin. He smirked, emboldened by my apparent submission. He thought I was asking for wisdom. I was actually asking for evidence. Well, take my company Sterling Corp, he said, puffing out his chest. We are about to be acquired. It is a massive deal. A merger and acquisition play. M&A, that is what we call it in the biz. You probably don't know what that means, but basically a big fish eats a smaller fish to get stronger. I know what a merger is, Gavin, I said. Right, sure you do, he said dismissively. But you don't understand the intricacies. You don't understand how we value these things. It is all about EBITDA. That is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It is complex stuff. We have been working night and day to prep the books for this buyer, Aurora Ventures. My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my company's name. I kept my face completely neutral. Aurora Ventures, I asked, playing the part of the naive listener. They sound serious. They are sharks, Gavin said, laughing. Faceless sharks. Nobody knows who runs the fund. Some recluse billionaire probably. But they have deep pockets. And that is where the real skill comes in. See, Dom, corporate finance is an art, not a science. You have to paint a picture for the buyer. You have to make the bride look pretty for the wedding, if you catch my drift. He winked at me. A sloppy, conspiratorial wink. The wine was doing the talking now. He felt safe here in the garage with his wife and his loser sister-in-law. He thought nothing he said here mattered. He thought he was speaking into a void. What do you mean, paint a picture? I asked, leaning forward slightly. My hand drifted casually into my coat pocket where my phone sat. I pressed the side button 3 times, a shortcut I had programmed to start a voice recording instantly. Chloe yawned, checking her nails. Oh God, Gavin, don't bore her with the math. She barely passed algebra in high school. No, let him speak, I said. I am interested. How do you make a company look better than it is? Gavin grinned, delighted by the attention. He walked closer, lowering his voice to a stage whisper, as if sharing the secrets of the universe. We'll take our Q3 numbers, he said. They were a little soft. We missed our revenue targets by about 4%. If the buyers saw that they would undervalue the stock, they would offer us peanuts. So as the guy in charge of the audit prep, I had to get creative. Creative, I echoed. Yeah, Gavin said, swirling his wine. We shifted some operational costs into capital expenditures, CapEx versus OpEx. It is a classic move, makes the immediate profit margins look fatter. And we recognized some revenue from next year's contracts a little early, just pulled them forward into December. Technically, it is a gray area, but who is going to check? The auditors are lazy, and the buyers are desperate to close the deal before the fiscal year ends. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He was admitting to accounting fraud. He was admitting to cooking the books to inflate the valuation of the company I had just bought. He was stealing from me. But isn't that illegal? I asked, my voice trembling with feigned innocence. Gavin barked out a laugh. Illegal. Dom, grow up. It is how the world works. Everybody fudges the numbers a little. It is called window dressing. Once the deal goes through and the wire transfer hits, it is their problem, not ours. By the time they figure it out, I will have cashed out my stock options and be sitting on a beach in Turks and Caicos. And you will still be scraping by, wondering why the world is so unfair. He took a celebratory gulp of his wine, finishing the glass. That is why I am the VP and you are, well, he sneered. Because I know how to play the game. I know how to bend the rules to win. He turned to Chloe, wrapping an arm around her waist. Come on, babe. It is freezing in here. And I think I have educated your sister enough for one night. Let's go back to the fire. Chloe snuggled into him, shooting me one last look of disdain. Try to stay warm, Dom. And seriously think about that cleaning job. I would hate to see you homeless. They turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I watched them go, their laughter fading as they crunched through the snow back to the main house. I sat there for a long moment in the silence. Then slowly I pulled my phone from my pocket. I stopped the recording. I pressed play. Gavin's voice, clear and arrogant, filled the small room. By the time they figure it out, I will have cashed out. It is called window dressing. We shifted operational costs. It was perfect. It was a confession. It was a smoking gun. He thought he was explaining his genius to a fool. He didn't realize he was handing a loaded weapon to his executioner. I tapped on the recording and hit share. I selected the contact for Mr. Henderson, my lead attorney who was currently on a private jet heading this way. I added a simple text message. He just admitted to fraud and embezzlement regarding the Q3 earnings. Use this to trigger the bad actor clause in the acquisition contract. I want his severance package voided. I want his stock options seized. And I want the FBI on the line before you land. I hit send. The little swoosh sound of the message going through was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I stood up and walked to the door, pushing it shut and locking it tight. The cold was still there, but I didn't feel it anymore. I looked at the bottle of wine Gavin had left behind. I picked it up and poured the contents onto the concrete floor. I wouldn't drink their poison. I went back to the window. Inside the house, I could see Gavin pouring another drink, clapping my father on the back. He looked so happy. He looked so secure. Tick-tock, Gavin, I whispered. Tick-tock. The game wasn't just rigged. The game was mine. And the players were about to find out that the woman in the garage held the only winning ticket. The humiliation of the maid offer, the mansplaining, the dismissal, it all fueled the fire that was rising inside me. I wasn't just going to fire him, I was going to destroy him. And I was going to do it with a smile on my face, wearing the very clothes he mocked. I checked the time. Mr. Henderson would be landing in 45 minutes. 45 minutes until the end of their world. I sat back down on the mattress, wrapped the thin blanket around my shoulders, and waited. The cold was no longer my enemy. It was my witness. The solitude of the garage was short-lived. I had just begun to regain feeling in my toes when a sharp, insistent banging rattled the thin metal of the door. It was not a knock of invitation, but a summons of demand. I knew that rhythm. It was my mother. I unlocked the door and opened it to find Beatrice standing there, her arms crossed, clutching a cashmere shawl around her shoulders to ward off the snow. She did not look at my face, but directed her gaze over my shoulder at the dismal state of the garage, curling her lip in disgust. "You need to come inside," she said, her tone clipping the ends of the words. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. Did a seat open up at the table, or did the Millers decide they prefer the ambiance of a tool shed? "Don't be snippy," Dominique Beatrice snapped. "It is Marta. She has taken ill. Fainted right in the kitchen. I had to send her home in a taxi." I waited, knowing exactly what was coming next. Marta was our housekeeper, a woman who had practically raised me while Beatrice was busy attending charity luncheons. If Marta was gone, the facade of the perfect hostess was in jeopardy. So I asked. "So I need you to serve the dinner," Beatrice said, as if it were the most natural request in the world. "The turkey is ready to be carved, and the sides need to be plated. Chloe cannot do it. She is entertaining the guests. And I certainly cannot be running back and forth to the kitchen in this gown. You are dressed for manual labor anyway." There it was. The demotion was complete. I was not just the black sheep. I was now the help. A part of me wanted to slam the door in her face to tell her that my hourly consulting rate was higher than the cost of her entire wardrobe. But the predator in me, the one who had just initiated a hostile takeover of Gavin's company, saw an opportunity. If I went inside, I could watch them. I could gather more ammunition. I could see the cracks in the foundation up close before I brought the whole house down. Fine, I said, grabbing my coat. I will help. Beatrice didn't say thank you. She simply turned on her heel and marched back toward the house, expecting me to follow like a well-trained spaniel. I walked behind her, the snow crunching under my boots, suppressing the urge to smile. She thought she was using me. She had no idea she was inviting the wolf into the sheepfold. The heat of the kitchen was overwhelming after the freezer box of the garage. It smelled of sage, roasted poultry, and stress. Pots were bubbling on the stove, and a massive 20-pound turkey sat on the counter, golden and glistening. I took off my heavy coat, revealing the simple beige sweater and jeans that my mother despised. I washed my hands, the hot water stinging my cold skin, and tied one of Marta's white aprons around my waist. The transformation was seamless. In their eyes, I had finally found my proper place. I loaded the heavy silver platter with the turkey and took a deep breath. Pushing through the swinging door into the dining room, I entered the lion's den. The conversation stopped as I entered. All eyes turned to me. For a second, there was an awkward silence, the kind that hangs heavy when social boundaries are blurred. Then Gavin broke the tension. "Ah, look at that service," he boomed, raising his glass. "I always said you had a calling for hospitality, Dom. Maybe after the cleaning gig you can try catering." The table erupted in polite, tittering laughter. I set the turkey down in the center of the table, my face a mask of calm. Mrs. Miller, Gavin's mother, looked at me through her rimless spectacles. She was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and spoke in a voice that sounded like tearing silk. "So this is the sister?" Mrs. Miller asked, looking from Chloe to me and back again. The confusion on her face was evident. She was trying to reconcile Chloe's light complexion and expensive silk with my dark skin and apron. "Yes, this is Dominique," Beatrice said quickly, waving a hand dismissively. "She is in between things right now. She is helping us out tonight since our staff had an emergency." "In between things?" Mr. Miller asked. He was a man with a red face and a thick neck, the kind of man who measured respect in tax brackets. "What do you do, dear, when you aren't filling in as a waitress?" "I work in finance, actually," I said quietly as I began to ladle gravy into the boat. Mr. Miller snorted. "Finance. That is a broad term. My son Gavin is in finance. He is a vice president. What is it you do?" "Bank teller, data entry." "I am a freelancer," I said, using the cover story I had maintained for years. "I consult on investment strategies for small businesses." "Ah, freelancer," Mr. Miller said, nodding knowingly at his wife. "That is the new word for unemployed, isn't it? No benefits, no stability, gig economy. It is a shame. You know our Gavin has a full benefits package. 401k matching. That is real work." I moved around the table, filling wine glasses. As I poured for Mrs. Miller, she pulled her glass away slightly, as if afraid I might spill on her. "Well, not everyone has Gavin's drive, dear," Mrs. Miller said to her husband, but loud enough for me to hear. "Some people are just not cut out for the corporate ladder. It takes a certain pedigree." I caught Chloe's eye. She was smirking, enjoying the show. She didn't defend me. She didn't clarify that I had graduated summa cum laude. She just took a sip of her wine and let her in. Laws tear me apart. I continued to circle the table, refilling water-clearing appetizer plates. I was invisible and hyper-visible all at once. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, discussing my lack of ambition, my poor fashion choices, my unfortunate hair. But while they talked, I watched, and what I saw made the anger in my belly turn into cold, hard calculation. I looked at the wine I was pouring. Beatrice had insisted I decant it into crystal carafes before bringing it out. She claimed it was to let the wine breathe. But as I had stood in the kitchen, I had seen the empty bottles in the recycling bin. It wasn't the vintage Bordeaux she claimed it was. It was a $12 table wine from the discount liquor store. She was serving swill in Waterford crystal, hoping the label on the decanter would fool the palate of her wealthy guests. It was the perfect metaphor for my family, a cheap, acidic reality hidden inside a shiny, expensive container. I looked at the art on the walls. Above the fireplace hung a large, abstract painting that Beatrice loved to tell people was a Basquiat print she had acquired at a Sotheby's auction. I paused behind Mr. Miller's chair, studying the brushstrokes, or rather the lack of them. It was a Giclée print on canvas mass-produced. I could see the pixelation if I squinted. A real collector would spot it in seconds. The Millers, for all their pretension, clearly didn't know art, or they were too polite to point out that their hosts were frauds. Everything in the room was a lie. The heavy velvet curtains were hiding drafty single-pane windows that hadn't been replaced in 30 years. The Persian rug was threadbare in the spots hidden by furniture. My father's Rolex, which glinted under the chandelier, was a high-quality replica I knew he had bought in Canal Street 5 years ago because he had sold the real one to pay for Chloe's engagement party. They were drowning. I could smell the desperation under the expensive perfume. They were insolvent, living on credit and prayers, hoping that Gavin's success would be the life raft that kept them afloat. And I, the daughter, they banished to the garage. The freelancer they mocked was the only one in the room with a net worth that was actually positive. I finished serving the sides and took a step back, melting into the shadows near the kitchen door. "Is there anything else?" I asked softly. "No, that will be all," Beatrice said, not looking up from her plate. She was busy charming Mr. Miller. "You can clear the plates when we are done. Go wait in the kitchen." I turned and walked out the swinging door, cutting off the sound of their laughter. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I leaned against the counter, letting out a long breath. The humiliation was a physical weight heavy on my shoulders. It wasn't the serving that bothered me. There is dignity in labor. It was the erasure. It was the fact that to them I was only useful when I was serving them. The door swung open again, softer this time. I stiffened, expecting Beatrice coming to scold me for some imaginary infraction. But it was my father. Lionel stood in the doorway looking nervous. He checked over his shoulder to make sure no one had followed him. He closed the door gently and walked over to me. He looked old. The lines around his eyes were deep and his shoulders were slumped in his tuxedo. "Dominique," he whispered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a linen napkin. It was bundled up into a small ball. He pressed it into my hand. It was warm and greasy. "I didn't get a chance to make you a plate," he mumbled, his eyes darting around the room as if he were committing a crime. "But I saved you a drumstick. And a roll. You must be hungry." I looked down at the napkin in my hand. I slowly unfolded it. There, sitting in a grease stain on the white linen, was a turkey leg and a squashed dinner roll. It was pathetic. It was a scrap thrown to a dog. "Eat it quickly," he said, patting my arm with a trembling hand. "Before your mother comes in, she is just stressed, you know. She wants everything to be perfect for Gavin." I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had once been my hero. I waited for him to say he was sorry. I waited for him to say that it was wrong to make me sleep in the garage. I waited for him to tell me to come back to the table and take his seat. But he didn't. He just smiled, a weak, watery smile. "It is good turkey," he said. Moist. He was an enabler. His silence was louder than Beatrice's insults. He saw me. He knew I was hurting. But he chose his own peace over my dignity. He chose to keep Beatrice happy rather than keep his daughter safe. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice void of emotion. "Good girl," he said. He looked relieved. He felt he had done his duty. He had fed the stray cat. Now he could go back to the warmth of the party with a clear conscience. He turned and slipped back into the dining room. I stood there alone in the kitchen holding the greasy napkin. I didn't eat the turkey. I walked over to the trash can and let it drop. The thud it made against the bottom of the bin sounded like a gavel coming down. That was the final severing. The last thread of hope that my father would stand up for me had just snapped. He had offered me a secret drumstick when I deserved a public apology. I washed the grease from my hands, scrubbing until my skin was red. I dried them on the apron. I was done being the daughter. I was done being the waitress. I checked my watch. Mr. Henderson had landed. He was in the car. 10 minutes. I took off the apron and threw it on the counter. I smoothed down my sweater. I wasn't going to wait in the kitchen. I wasn't going to wait in the garage. I walked to the back door, but instead of going out, I unlocked it to let in the cold air, clearing the scent of the turkey from my nose. Then I turned back toward the dining room. I wasn't going to serve dessert. I was going to serve justice. And unlike my father's secret turkey leg, everyone was going to get a taste. The dining room was warm, suffocatingly so filled with the rich scents of rosemary and roasted meat that I was not invited to partake in. I returned from the kitchen not to a place setting of silver and crystal, but to a folding plastic stool that had been dragged in from the pantry. My mother pointed to a corner of the room near the sideboard where the extra wine bottles stood like sentinels. "That is the only space available," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper so the Millers wouldn't hear the venom in it. "Try not to loom over the guests, Dominique." I sat down. The plastic seat was hard and cold, a sharp contrast to the plush velvet chairs the others rested upon. From my vantage point, I felt less like a family member and more like a spectator at a zoo watching a rare species of delusional animals perform a mating dance. I crossed my legs and folded my hands in my lap, adopting the posture of a silent observer. I was invisible to them, a piece of furniture that breathed, yet I was the only person in the room who saw everything clearly. The performance began immediately. My mother Beatrice was the conductor orchestrating the conversation to ensure maximum adoration from Gavin's parents. She leaned forward, her emerald earrings catching the light, and directed her beam of approval toward Chloe. "We are just so proud of Chloe," Beatrice gushed, placing a hand over her heart. "You know, when she was promoted to marketing director last month, the CEO told her she was the youngest executive in the company's history." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my face neutral. I knew for a fact that Chloe was a junior marketing associate. I knew this because I had hired the background check firm that vetted Sterling Corp's employees during the due diligence phase of my acquisition. Chloe spent her days managing the company's Instagram account and ordering lunch for the real executives. She wasn't a director. She was an intern with the inflated title and a salary that couldn't cover her shoe habit. "Oh, stop, Mom," Chloe said, waving a hand with false modesty. "It wasn't a big deal. I just understand the consumer mindset better than the older generation. They need fresh eyes." Mrs. Miller nodded sagely, cutting into her turkey with surgical precision. "It is wonderful to see a young woman with such ambition. Unlike, well, some paths are harder than others." She didn't look at me, but the pause was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Beatrice quickly filled the silence. "Exactly. We have always said that Chloe has the head for business. She takes after her father that way." My father Lionel kept his head down, focused entirely on his mashed potatoes. He knew the business was failing. He knew he hadn't made a sound business decision in a decade. But he let Beatrice rewrite history because it was easier than facing the truth. The conversation shifted, as it inevitably did, to the star of the show, Gavin. He sat at the head of the table, sprawling in his chair as if it were a throne. The wine had loosened his tongue, and his arrogance was spilling out like an overfilled glass. "So, Gavin," Mr. Miller said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "tell us more about this acquisition. You mentioned a big bonus coming your way." Gavin grinned, leaning back and swirling his glass. He looked around the table, making sure he had everyone's attention. Even I, in my corner, felt the weight of his ego. "It is a done deal, Dad," Gavin said. "We are just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. The buying firm is called Aurora Ventures. They are a massive private equity group, very secretive, very deep pockets. And you are handling the transition," Mrs. Miller asked, beaming with maternal pride. "Handling it, Mom, I am orchestrating it," Gavin bragged. "Look, these private equity guys, they have the money, but they don't know the operations. They don't know the grit. They are just checkbooks looking for a place to land." He took a sip of wine, his eyes glazing over with self-importance. I sat very still on my stool. He was talking about me. He was calling me a checkbook. From what I gather, Gavin continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. The owner of Aurora is some old recluse. Probably some ancient guy sitting in a penthouse in Geneva who hasn't stepped foot in a real office since the 80s. We call them absentee landlords in the industry. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. It was absurd. It was delicious. He thought I was an old man in Geneva. He had no idea the absentee landlord was sitting 6 feet away from him wearing a sweater from Target and watching him dig his own grave. So how do you deal with someone like that? Chloe asked, playing the role of the adoring wife perfectly. Easy, Gavin said, winking at her. You feed them what they want to see. You dazzle them with projections. You use big words and complicated charts. These old geezers, they get confused by modern tech stacks and synergy models. I will walk into that boardroom next week, flash a few PowerPoint slides, and wrap this guy around my little finger. He won't even know he is being managed until I have signed my own bonus check. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound of pure greed. I am going to milk this Aurora Ventures for every dime they have. And the best part? The owner is probably too senile to even notice. The bubble in my chest burst. It started as a small snort, a sudden intake of air that I couldn't suppress. It was a sharp, involuntary sound that cut through the murmur of their admiration like a gunshot. The table went silent. Every head turned toward the corner, toward the plastic stool, toward the poor relation who had dared to make a noise. Gavin stopped laughing. His face hardened. Beatrice looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Is something funny? Dominique Gavin asked, his voice icy. I cleared my throat, forcing the smile off my face, though my eyes were dancing with a fire they couldn't comprehend. No, Gavin, I said, my voice steady. I just choked on some air. Please continue. It is fascinating to hear how you plan to manipulate a billionaire. Beatrice stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She marched over to me, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. She loomed over me, blocking my view of the table, trying to shield her precious guests from my disruptive presence. She leaned down, her voice a hiss that was meant only for my ears, but carried the weight of a scream. You are embarrassing me, she whispered. We let you inside out of the goodness of our hearts. We let you sit here while we eat. And you dare to mock your brother-in-law. I didn't mock him, Mother, I whispered back. I was just listening. You are jealous, Beatrice spat. You have always been jealous of them. You sit there in your cheap clothes with your messy life, and you cannot stand to see Gavin succeeding. You cannot stand to see Chloe happy. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the wool of my sweater. If you make one more sound, Dominique, just one more, you are going back to the garage. And this time, I will lock the door myself. Do not ruin this night. Do not ruin Gavin's big break. This family needs this. She glared at me, her eyes pleading and threatening all at once. She was terrified. She was terrified that the house of cards she had built was going to collapse if I breathed on it too hard. She didn't know that I wasn't the wind. I was the earthquake. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked up into her eyes. I understand, Mother, I said softly. I wouldn't want to ruin Gavin's big break. She released me, smoothing her dress as if touching me had dirtied her. She turned back to the table, pasting a bright, fake smile onto her face. So sorry about that, everyone, she chirped, resuming her seat. Dominique gets a little eccentric when she is tired. Please, Gavin, go on. You were telling us about the bonus. Gavin relaxed, his ego stroked once more. Right. So as I was saying, once I get this old guy from Aurora to sign off on the restructure, the payout is going to be massive. I am thinking of upgrading the Porsche, maybe looking at a vacation home in Aspen. I watched him. I watched the way he cut his meat, confident and predatory. I watched Chloe look at him with dollar signs in her eyes. I reached into my pocket and touched my phone. I didn't need to say a word. The file on my server was already compiled. The forensic accountants had already traced the fake revenue. The old geezer he was planning to manipulate was about to turn his Aspen dream into a federal indictment nightmare. Let him talk, I told myself. Let him build the tower as high as he wants. The higher he goes, the longer the fall. I sat back on my plastic stool, invisible once more. But this time the silence wasn't oppressive. It was the calm before the storm, and I was the only one who could hear the thunder approaching. Dinner concluded with the scraping of chairs and the forced joviality that accompanies a family trying too hard to pretend they like each other. We migrated to the living room where the massive spruce tree stood, creating a canopy of twinkling lights and glass ornaments over a mountain of wrapped presents. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls, but the warmth did not reach me. I stood near the doorway, leaning against the frame, while the others settled onto the plush sofas and armchairs. It was time for the main event. In my family, gift-giving was not an act of love. It was a contact sport. It was a display of dominance, a way to show who had the most money, the most taste, and the most affection to buy. And tonight, Gavin was the undisputed champion of the arena. He stood in the center of the room, commanding attention like a ringmaster. He held a sleek gold envelope in his hand, waving it gently as he looked at my parents. Beatrice, Lionel, he said, his voice dripping with performative generosity. You two have done so much for us this year. You have welcomed me into the family, you have supported Chloe, and you have been the bedrock of our lives. We wanted to give you something that truly reflects our gratitude. He handed the envelope to my mother. Beatrice accepted it with trembling hands, her eyes wide with anticipation. She tore open the seal and pulled out a glossy itinerary printed on heavy cardstock. Her scream of delight was sharp enough to shatter glass. She jumped up, clutching the paper to her chest, tears instantly springing to her eyes. Paris, she shrieked. Oh my God, Lionel. Look, they are sending us to Paris. The room erupted in applause. My father took the paper, adjusting his glasses, a slow smile spreading across his face. Business class tickets, he muttered. The Four Seasons, George V. Gavin, this is too much. Nothing is too much for you guys, Gavin said, basking in their adoration. You deserve the best. A full week of luxury, spa treatments included. Beatrice threw her arms around Gavin, burying her face in his neck. Oh, you wonderful, wonderful boy. You are the son I always prayed for. I watched this tableau from my corner, feeling a dry, bitter laugh caught in my throat. The son she always prayed for was a fraud. My internal financial sensors were screaming. I knew Gavin's bank accounts. I knew his credit limits. There was no way he had paid for this trip. He had likely booked it on a credit card that was maxed out, or worse, he had printed the itinerary without actually paying for the tickets, planning to figure out the finances later, once his imaginary bonus came through. It was a paper promise as hollow as his soul. Beatrice pulled away, wiping her tears, and looked at me. Her expression shifted instantly from adoration to pity. Isn't that amazing, Dominique? Your sister and Gavin are so generous. Maybe one day, if you work hard enough, you will be able to treat us to something nice too, though perhaps a weekend in Atlantic City is more your speed. The Millers chuckled politely. I said nothing. I just smiled, a tight, thin stretching of my lips. Now, Dom, Chloe said, stepping forward. She was holding a large box wrapped in silver paper with a massive red bow. She struggled slightly with the weight of it. We didn't forget about you. I know things have been tight for you lately, so I wanted to get you something practical, something you really need. She placed the box on the ottoman in front of me. The eyes of the entire room were fixed on me. I could feel the heat of their judgment. Go on. Open it, Chloe urged, clapping her hands together. I stepped forward and untied the ribbon. The box was from a high-end department store, which gave a momentary flicker of hope that perhaps just for a second my sister had actually thought of me. But as I lifted the lid, that hope died a violent death. Inside the box was a chaotic jumble of clothes. I reached in and pulled out a sweater. It was gray cashmere, pilling at the elbows with a small dark stain near the hem. I recognized it immediately. It was Chloe's old sweater from 3 seasons ago. I pulled out a pair of jeans. They were faded in the wrong places and worn at the inner thighs. I dug deeper. Underneath the pile of cast-off clothing was a thick stack of paper. I picked it up. It was a booklet of coupons for a fast food burger chain. Not a gift card. Coupons. Buy one, get one free. 50 cents off a milkshake. The kind of coupons that come in the junk mail. I stared at the contents of the box. It wasn't a gift. It was a donation bin. I looked up at Chloe. She was smiling, a beatific expression on her face that didn't quite reach her predatory eyes. I went through my closet and realized I had so many things I don't wear anymore, she said, her voice dripping with faux charity. And I know you cannot afford decent clothes on a freelancer's budget. These are high-quality brands, Dom. Much better than what you usually wear. And the coupons? Well, I figured you are always on the run, and everyone needs to eat, right? The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then Mrs. Miller spoke up. That is so thoughtful of you, Chloe. Recycling is so important, and helping family is a virtue. Beatrice nodded in agreement. You should say thank you, Dominique. Your sister is giving you hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise. I looked at the stain on the sweater. I looked at the coupons for discount grease. The humiliation was designed to be absolute. They were telling me in front of strangers that I was a charity case, that I was worth only their refuse. I carefully folded the sweater and placed it back in the box. I placed the coupons on top. I closed the lid. Thank you, Chloe, I said. My voice was calm, unnervingly so. It is exactly what I expected from you. Chloe frowned, sensing the double meaning but unable to pinpoint it. She waved her hand. Well, you are welcome. Now, I said, reaching into the inner pocket of my coat. I have something for the family as well. Beatrice let out a short, derisive snort. Oh, Dominique, you didn't have to. We really don't need any homemade trinkets or whatever it is you can afford. It is not homemade, I said, and I think you will find it very valuable. I pulled out a small white envelope. It was plain, unadorned, with no ribbon and no card. I walked over to Beatrice and held it out. For the house, I said. Beatrice looked at the envelope with suspicion, then at Gavin as if checking if it was safe to touch. She took it gingerly, her manicured nails clicking against the paper. Well, let's see, she said, tearing it open. She pulled out a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. She unfolded it. I watched her face. I watched the color drain from her skin, starting at her neck and rising up to her hairline until she looked like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands began to shake violently this time, rattling the paper so loud it sounded like dry leaves in a storm. What? What is this? She whispered. Lionel leaned over to look. He gasped, dropping his glass of brandy. It shattered on the hearth, but no one noticed. Beatrice looked up at me, her eyes wild with panic and fury. She crumpled the paper and threw it onto the floor at my feet. How dare you! She screamed, her voice cracking. How dare you bring this into my house on Christmas Eve? Is this your idea of a joke? You are sick, Dominique. You are absolutely sick. Gavin stepped forward, protective and confused. What is it? What did she give you? She is cursing us. Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She brought bad omens into this house. She wants to ruin us because she is jealous of the Paris trip. I stood my ground, immovable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply looked down at the crumpled paper on the rug. It is not a curse, Mother, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. And it is not a joke. Read the red stamp at the top. Gavin bent down and picked up the paper. He smoothed it out. I saw his eyes scan the document, and I saw the moment the arrogance died in his throat. It was a notice of default and intent to foreclose. The third and final notice. This says the house is being auctioned in 30 days, Gavin stammered. Beatrice was sobbing now, clutching her chest. It is a mistake. It is a lie. Why would you give me this? Where did you get this? I found it in the mailbox when I arrived. I lied smoothly, along with 2 others just like it that were unopened in the trash. It seems you have been missing some correspondence, Mother. I looked at the Millers who were staring at their hosts with horror. You see, I continued my voice conversational. I didn't have money for a trip to Paris, but I thought the gift of truth was priceless. You are not going to France, Mother. You are going to court. Beatrice lunged at me, but Lionel caught her arm. Stop it, Bea. My father whispered, his face gray. It is true. I tried to tell you. You knew, Beatrice screamed at him, turning her rage on her husband. You knew, and you let me plan a party. I watched them turn on each other. The perfect family facade was dissolving like sugar in hot water. I really think you should check the date on the auction, I said helpfully. It is coming up very soon. Perhaps you can use the refund from the Paris tickets to pay for a moving van. Chloe stared at me, her mouth agape. You are enjoying this, she accused. You are actually enjoying this. I looked at her, then at the box of old clothes she had given me. I am just being practical, Chloe, I said. Like you said, recycling is important. And it looks like you are going to need to recycle your lifestyle very, very soon. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Beatrice's weeping. But the blow hadn't fully landed yet. They thought this was just a financial hiccup. They thought Gavin could fix it. They didn't know that the person holding the mortgage, the person whose name was on the bottom of that foreclosure filing under the corporate entity, was standing right in front of them. Gavin looked up from the paper, his face pale. I can fix this, he stammered. I can call the bank. I have connections. I will get a loan against my Sterling Corp stock. I almost smiled. Go ahead, Gavin, I said. Make the call. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The paper lay on the Persian rug, like a radioactive isotope pulsating with a toxic truth that no one wanted to touch. My mother's sobbing was the only sound in the room, a jagged, rhythmic gasping that grated against the silence. She looked from the foreclosure notice to Gavin, her eyes pleading for him to perform another miracle, to wave his hand and make the ugly reality disappear, just as he had promised to make all their financial inadequacies vanish with his impending bonus. Gavin, realizing his role as the family savior was under threat, stepped into the breach. He let out a loud, scoffing laugh that sounded forced and brittle, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. He adjusted his silk tie, puffing out his chest in a display of unearned confidence that was almost impressive in its delusion. Everyone, please let us take a breath, Gavin said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Beatrice, dry your tears. This is clearly a mistake, a clerical error. You know how these big banks are. They automate everything. A computer probably missed a decimal point somewhere or failed to register a transfer. It happens all the time. He walked over and picked up the notice, holding it by the corner as if it were a dirty tissue. I mean, look at this, he continued, scanning the document with a sneer. Notice of default. It is boilerplate language. It is a scare tactic. I deal with compliance departments every day. This is just an algorithm gone rogue. My father Lionel looked up, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. Do you think so, Gavin? I mean, we have been a little behind, but I didn't think it was this bad. Of course I think so. Lionel, Gavin said, his voice dripping with condescension. You have assets, you have equity. Banks don't just seize properties like this without a dialogue. This is a system glitch, nothing more. He turned to his parents, the Millers, who were sitting stiffly on the sofa, looking as if they wished they could teleport anywhere else. Mom. Dad, don't worry, Gavin said smoothly. This will be sorted out in 5 minutes. I know the regional director at the bank. We play golf at the club. One phone call and this misunderstanding will be cleared up. We will be back to opening presents before the ice in your drinks melts. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, flourishing it like a weapon. He scrolled through his contacts, making a show of finding the number. I am putting it on speaker so you can all hear how ridiculous this is, Gavin announced, tapping the screen. The room held its breath. The trill of the ringing tone echoed through the high ceilings of the living room, once, twice, 3 times. I watched Gavin's face. He was smiling, confident, expecting his golfing buddy to pick up and share a laugh about the incompetence of the back office. But the call went to voicemail. Gavin frowned, canceling the call. He must be at a Christmas Eve dinner, he muttered. No matter, I will call the priority support line. I have a platinum status access code. They answer 24/7. He dialed another number. This time the call connected. Thank you for calling the Platinum Client Services Division, a smooth automated voice said. Please enter your access code. Gavin punched in the numbers with aggressive confidence. He looked at Beatrice and winked. Watch this, he whispered. There was a pause, and then a human voice came on the line. It was not the warm, obsequious tone of a concierge used to dealing with wealthy clients. It was the flat-guarded tone of a risk management officer. Mr. Miller, the voice said. We have been expecting your call. See? Gavin said to the room, muting the phone for a second. They know who I am. He unmuted. Yes, this is Gavin Miller. I am calling because my in-laws, the Dubois family, received a ridiculous piece of mail regarding a property in Sag Harbor. A foreclosure notice. I need you to go into the system, flag it as an error, and send a formal apology letter immediately. It is ruining our Christmas Eve. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew that silence. It was the sound of a lawyer reviewing a script. Mr. Miller, the representative, said, his voice dropping an octave. I am afraid I cannot do that. Gavin's smile faltered. Excuse me, do you know who I am? I am a vice president at Sterling Corp. I hold significant assets with your institution. I am telling you to fix this glitch. It is not a glitch, sir, the representative replied, his voice steely. And regarding your assets, I am looking at your file now. As of 45 minutes ago, all accounts linked to your social security number, including the joint accounts with your wife Chloe, and the guarantee accounts for the Dubois mortgage, have been frozen. Frozen, Gavin shouted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. What are you talking about? We received a flag from the Securities and Exchange Commission and a directive from the primary lien holder. The voice continued, relentless and devoid of emotion. There are allegations of financial irregularities and potential fraud. Until the investigation is complete, no funds can be moved, no credit can be extended, and no forbearance can be granted on the Dubois property. The foreclosure is active. The auction date is set. Fraud. Gavin sputtered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. That is insanity. I am going to sue you. I am going to sue this entire bank. You are welcome to contact our legal department on Tuesday, sir, the representative said. But I must inform you that the lien holder has instructed us to proceed with the eviction process if the property is not vacated within 30 days. Have a good evening. The line went dead. The disconnect tone beeped once, twice before Gavin lowered the phone. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He stood in the center of the room, stripped of his armor, exposed as powerless. The silence that followed was not the quiet of peace. It was the vacuum after an explosion. My mother stared at him. The hope in her eyes curdled into horror. Frozen, Beatrice whispered, What did he mean? Frozen, Gavin? What did you do? I didn't do anything, Gavin yelled, his voice cracking. It is a conspiracy. Someone is messing with me. Beatrice stood up, her face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. She turned to my father. Lionel, do something. You heard him. We are going to lose the house. Lionel sat in his armchair, looking like a man who had finally collapsed under the weight of decades of denial. I can't be, he whispered. I don't have the money. I told you 6 months ago we were in trouble, but you insisted on the renovations. You insisted on the parties. Beatrice shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She flew at him, hitting his chest with her fists. You useless man! You weak, pathetic man! I spent my life building this reputation. I spent my life making us look respectable, and you let it slip away. You let us become beggars. I watched them. I watched the woman who had criticized my hair, my career, and my life unravel completely. She wasn't worried about where they would live. She wasn't worried about my father's health. She was worried about the neighbors. She was worried about the reputation she had crafted on a foundation of lies. Chloe began to cry loud, heaving sobs. My credit card, she wailed. Gavin, he said our joint accounts are frozen. I have a shopping spree scheduled for Tuesday. I can't be frozen. The Miller stood up abruptly. Mrs. Miller grabbed her handbag, clutching it to her chest, as if she feared we might try to steal it. Gavin. Mr. Miller said, his voice stern and cold. I think we should go. This is a legal matter. We cannot be involved. Dad, wait, Gavin pleaded. I can explain. We will talk when you have a lawyer, his father said, turning his back on his son. Come, Martha. They walked out of the room, leaving their son standing amidst the wreckage of his ego. Gavin looked around wildly, his eyes landing on Beatrice, then Lionel, then Chloe. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the collapse of his world. It is the bank, he muttered, pacing the floor. It is that stupid bank. They are incompetent. No, Gavin, I said. My voice was soft, but it cut through the chaos like a bell. I stood up from my plastic stool in the corner. I brushed the crumbs of their pity from my jeans. I smoothed down the cheap sweater I was wearing. I walked into the center of the room, stepping over the crumpled foreclosure notice. Beatrice stopped hitting my father. Chloe stopped crying. Gavin stopped pacing. They all looked at me. For the first time all night, they were actually looking at me, not past me. It is not the bank's fault, I said, my voice steady and calm. They are just following orders. What would you know about it? Gavin snapped, trying to regain a shred of authority. Go back to your garage, Dominique. This is adult business. I smiled. It was a cold smile. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. I know about it because I am the one who gave the order, I said. Gavin blinked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and turned it around so they could all see. Displayed on the screen was the digital ownership certificate of the debt. The bank isn't the problem, Gavin. I continued, taking a step closer to him. The glitch isn't a glitch. The accounts were frozen because the new owner of the debt demanded it, and that owner is me. The silence in the living room was heavy and suffocating, a thick blanket of tension that seemed to absorb the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. My declaration that I owned the debt had landed like a grenade, but the dust hadn't quite settled yet. Gavin was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting between the digital certificate on my phone screen and my face. He was trying to process the information, trying to fit the square peg of my actual power into the round hole of his prejudice. To him, I was Dominique the failure, the freelancer, the charity case. The idea that I could be the predator in his financial food chain was simply does not compute. You are lying, Gavin whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to reject a reality that terrified him. You probably photoshopped that. You think you can scare us with a fake screenshot? Beatrice latched onto this explanation like a drowning woman grabbing a piece of driftwood. Yes, she cried, her voice shrill. That is it. It is a prank. A cruel, sick prank. You always had a twisted sense of humor, Dominique. Just like your father. She turned to Lionel for support, but my father was staring at the floor, his face the color of ash. He knew. Deep down, he knew the precarious house of cards he had been living in, and he knew that I was the only one who had ever actually fixed anything in this family. I was about to respond to dismantle their denial with another layer of proof when a sound cut through the room. It was the upbeat, synthesized marimba of Gavin's ringtone. We all froze. The sound was incongruously cheerful, mocking the grim atmosphere of the room. Gavin jerked as if he had been electrocuted. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it again. He looked at the screen and his face underwent a transformation. The fear vanished, replaced instantly by a surge of relief and renewed arrogance. It is Richard Gavin announced, breathless. It is the CEO, Richard Sterling. He looked around the room, puffing out his chest. See, I told you. He is calling to fix this. He probably just got the alert about the frozen accounts and wants to apologize personally. This is how high-level business works, Dominique. The big dogs talk and the problems go away. He swiped the screen to answer, and because his ego demanded an audience because he needed us to witness his importance, he put the call on speaker. Richard Gavin boomed, forcing a jovial tone into his voice. Merry Christmas, sir. I am so glad you called. We have had a bit of a hiccup with the bank and my family is quite upset, but I told them. Shut up, Gavin. The voice on the other end was not merry. It was not apologetic. It was a roar. It was the sound of a man who was watching his life's work burn to the ground, and he was looking for the arsonist. Gavin's smile froze. Excuse me, Richard. The connection seems a bit. I said shut your mouth and listen to me. Richard Sterling screamed, his voice distorted by the volume. I am not calling to wish you a happy holiday. I am calling because I just got off the phone with the acquisition board at Aurora Ventures. Gavin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Oh, the buyers. Well, that is great, Richard. Did they sign the final? They are pulling the deal, Gavin, Richard yelled. They are threatening to walk away. Do you understand what that means? That means the stock crashes. That means bankruptcy. That means I lose everything. Gavin paled. Pulling the deal. Why? That makes no sense. The Q3 numbers were solid. I prepared them myself. That is exactly the problem, Richard retorted. They sent me a file, Gavin. A forensic audit file. They have flagged your department for gross negligence and securities fraud. The word fraud hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Chloe gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. Beatrice sank onto the sofa, her legs giving out. That is ridiculous, Gavin stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. I can explain. It is just aggressive accounting. Everyone does it. It is CapEx versus OPEX. It is standard practice. Standard practice. Richard laughed, a harsh barking sound. They have recordings, Gavin. They have an audio file of you admitting to cooking the books. They sent me a transcript where you literally brag about window dressing and pulling revenue forward to deceive the buyer. You admitted to deceiving them on tape. I watched Gavin. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. He looked at his phone, then he looked at me. His eyes widened. The memory of the garage, the wine, the bragging, the phone sitting casually in my pocket. He realized it. Finally, he realized it. I... Gavin stuttered. I don't know what you are talking about. I never said that. It must be a deepfake. AI voice generation. You know how advanced technology is these days, Richard. Don't you dare lie to me, Richard screamed. The metadata on the file is authentic, and they have more. They have emails. They have the unauthorized transfers you made to your personal offshore accounts last week. They have everything. Gavin looked at Chloe. She was staring at him with horror. The offshore accounts. The money he had claimed was a bonus was actually embezzled funds. The Paris trip. The designer clothes. It was all stolen money. Richard continued, his voice dropping to a deadly cold register. The board of Aurora Ventures has given me an ultimatum. They will only proceed with the acquisition if I excise the cancer immediately. You are the cancer, Gavin. Richard, please. Gavin begged, his voice high and thin. We can fix this. I can talk to them. I can smooth it over. Who is the contact? I will call them right now. You can't call them, Richard said, because you are fired, effective immediately. Your access to the building is revoked. Your company credit cards are canceled, and our legal team is drafting a lawsuit against you for breach of fiduciary duty as we speak. Fired, Gavin whispered. But it is Christmas Eve. I don't care if it is the apocalypse, Richard shouted. You nearly cost me $1 billion merger. Gavin looked around the room, desperate for an ally. Beatrice was weeping silently. Lionel was shaking his head. Chloe was looking at her husband as if he were a stranger. Who are they? Gavin shouted at the phone, his anger rising to mask his terror. Who is Aurora Ventures? I have never even met them. How can they have this vendetta against me? I am a vice president. I stood perfectly still watching the scene unfold. It was like watching a demolition in slow motion. The structure was crumbling girder by girder. They are the people who own you now, Richard said. And frankly, Gavin, I don't know who runs the show over there. They are extremely private, but they seem to know a hell of a lot about you. I don't understand, Gavin said, collapsing onto the arm of the sofa. You don't have to understand, Richard said. You just have to face the consequences. And Gavin… Yes, Gavin whispered. They told me they sent a representative to handle the asset recovery personally. They said their legal counsel is in the neighborhood. In the neighborhood? Gavin asked, confusion clouding his fear. What does that mean? It means, Richard said, his voice final, that you should probably answer the door. At that exact moment, as if choreographed by fate itself, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite social ring. It was a long, authoritative press of the buzzer that echoed through the house like a summons from the grave. The sound made everyone jump. Beatrice let out a small scream. Chloe grabbed Gavin's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Who is that? Chloe whispered. Gavin. Who is at the door? I don't know, Gavin hissed, pulling away from her. The doorbell rang again, more urgent this time. I stepped forward. The movement drew their eyes. I was the only person in the room who wasn't shaking. I was the only person who wasn't surprised. I think you should get that, Gavin, I said, my voice cutting through their panic. It would be rude to keep the lawyers waiting in the snow. Lawyers? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. Dominique, what do you know about this? I walked past them, heading toward the foyer. The heavy wooden floorboards didn't creak under my boots. I moved with the silent confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. The time for explanations was over. The time for revelation had arrived. I reached the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of a tall man and two broader figures behind him. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click was loud in the silent house. I swung the door open. A gust of wind blew snow into the foyer, swirling around the polished shoes of the man standing on the doormat. He was an older white man, distinguished, wearing a bespoke wool coat and a cashmere scarf. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy with the weight of the law. Behind him stood two large men in dark suits, their earpieces visible, their expressions impassive. It was Mr. Henderson, my consigliere, the man who had been the face of my empire while I remained in the shadows. Gavin stumbled into the foyer behind me, followed by the rest of the family. He looked at Mr. Henderson, desperate recognition flickering in his eyes. He didn't know the man, but he recognized the type. This was power. This was old money. This was the executioner. Can I help you? Gavin asked, his voice shaking. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at him. His eyes swept the room and locked onto me. He removed his hat, revealing silver hair, and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. Good evening, Madam President, Mr. Henderson said, his voice deep and resonant. I apologize for the intrusion on your holiday, but per your text message, we have executed the filings. He stepped inside, the two security guards following him. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The air was sucked out, replaced by the vacuum of shock. Madam, President Gavin whispered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Mr. Henderson finally turned to Gavin. He looked at him with the mild distaste one might show a cockroach found in a salad. Mr. Gavin Miller, I presume? Mr. Henderson asked. Yes, Gavin squeaked. I am Arthur Henderson, General Counsel for Aurora Ventures, he said, snapping his fingers. One of the guards stepped forward, and handed Gavin a thick envelope. You have been served. This is a notification of immediate termination for cause and a civil lawsuit for the recovery of embezzled funds. Your assets have been seized pending litigation. Gavin held the envelope as if it were burning his hands. But Richard said, Mr. Sterling works for us now. Mr. Henderson cut him off smoothly, and we have instructed him to clean house. Mr. Henderson turned back to me, ignoring the gasps from my mother and sister. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a sleek black folder, and regarding the property, Madam President, he said, handing the folder to me. Here is the deed transfer you requested. The bank was very cooperative once we exposed their oversight in lending to a high-risk borrower like Mr. Miller. I took the folder. It felt solid. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. Thank you, Arthur, I said. You made good time. I try my best, ma'am, he replied with a small smile. I turned to face my family. I held the folder against my chest. They were staring at me as if I had grown a second head. The cognitive dissonance was breaking their brains. They couldn't reconcile the Dominique they knew, the doormat, the failure with the woman who was currently commanding a legal team and destroying their lives. Chloe stepped forward, her hands trembling. Dom, what is going on? Why is he calling you president? Why does he have the deed? I looked at her. I looked at the red dress she couldn't afford. I looked at the fear in her eyes. Because, Chloe, I said softly, I am Aurora Ventures. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe imploding. You, Beatrice whispered. You own... The investment fund. I own it all, Mother, I said. I own the fund. I own Sterling Corp. I own the debt on this house. And as of 5 minutes ago, I opened the folder and tapped the document inside. I own the very floor you are standing on. Gavin dropped the envelope. Papers scattered across the marble floor, mixing with the melting snow. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a black woman he could dismiss. He saw a titan he had foolishly tried to crush. And the titan was smiling. The gust of wind that swept through the open door was freezing, carrying with it the biting chill of the blizzard. But the temperature in the foyer dropped even lower as the 3 men stepped across the threshold. The man in the center was a study in absolute terrifying authority. He was an older white gentleman, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair groomed to military precision and eyes the color of polished steel. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a suit that I knew cost more than Gavin's entire car. It was bespoke Savile Row tailoring, the kind that whispered wealth rather than screaming it. He didn't carry the frantic, sweaty energy of a man like Gavin, who was always hustling, always trying to prove his worth. This man moved with the heavy gravitational pull of someone who had already won every game he had ever played. Behind him stood 2 security personnel. They were not the mall cops or the bouncers Gavin might have been used to. These were massive men in dark tactical suits, wearing earpieces, their hands clasped loosely but ready in front of them. They scanned the room with professional detachment, identifying threats, securing the perimeter. One of them looked at Gavin, then at the vase on the entry table, assessing them with the same level of disinterest. Gavin, whose brain was clearly misfiring under the stress of the last 10 minutes, saw a white man in an expensive suit, and his conditioning took over. He saw a mirror image of what he desperately wanted to be. He saw an ally. He saw a savior. The delusion was so strong that he physically shook off the terror of the phone call and stepped forward, smoothing his hair, putting on his best fraternity brother smile. Oh, thank God. Gavin exhaled, the relief evident in his voice. He extended his hand, walking toward the older man, as if greeting an old friend at the country club. You must be the legal counsel Richard mentioned. Look, this is all a massive misunderstanding. A clerical error of the highest order. My name is Gavin Miller, Vice President of Sterling Corp. I am so glad you are here to clear this up. These banks, you know how they are. Trigger happy with the freeze buttons. Gavin laughed a nervous braying sound that echoed awkwardly in the high-ceilinged foyer. He stood there, hand outstretched, waiting for the firm grip, the nod of understanding, the validation of the boys' club. But the handshake never came. The older man did not stop. He did not smile. He did not even blink. He looked at Gavin's outstretched hand, then up at his face, with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were observing a pigeon that had accidentally flown indoors. He didn't break stride. He simply shifted his path slightly to the left, stepping around Gavin, as if he were an inconvenient piece of furniture, a coat rack that had been placed in the wrong spot. The snub was physical. It was visceral. It was a public execution of Gavin's social standing. Gavin was left standing there, hand hanging in empty air, his smile faltering into a rictus of confusion. He turned, watching the man walk past him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "But," Sir Gavin stammered, his voice pitching up, "Sir, I am talking to you. I am the vice president." The man ignored him completely. The two security guards followed in his wake, forcing Gavin to stumble back against the wall to avoid being trampled. They moved as a phalanx, a wedge of power cutting through the pretension of my parents' home. My mother Beatrice was clutching her pearls, her eyes darting between Gavin and the newcomer. She looked terrified. She had spent her life worshipping at the altar of proximity to whiteness and wealth, and now she was watching the hierarchy collapse in real time. She expected the man to demand to see the master of the house. She expected him to take charge. Instead, the man walked straight toward the corner of the foyer where I was standing. I hadn't moved. I was still leaning against the wall near the coat closet, wearing my faded jeans and the cheap sweater I had arrived in. I looked like the help. I looked like a nobody. But Mr. Henderson knew better. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He brought his heels together and straightened his posture, removing his leather gloves with deliberate, respectful movements. He tucked them into his pocket, and then in a move that sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room, he bowed. It wasn't a mocking bow. It wasn't a theatrical bow. It was a bow of deference. It was the way a knight bows to a queen. "Good evening, Madam President," Mr. Henderson said. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried the smooth cadence of the Ivy League education my mother had claimed I failed. He straightened up and looked me in the eye, his expression softening into one of genuine apology. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for the delay, Dominique," he continued. The storm front over the Atlantic was more severe than anticipated. The pilot advised against landing the helicopter on the lawn due to the wind shear, so we had to set down at the private airfield in East Hampton and take the car. "I hope we haven't kept you waiting too long." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound you could hear the snow hitting the glass of the windows. I pushed myself off the wall, standing to my full height. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded. "It is fine, Arthur," I said, my voice calm and steady. "The timing is actually impeccable." Mr. Henderson signaled to one of the guards, who stepped forward and handed him a sleek black leather briefcase. Mr. Henderson set it on the hallway table, snapped the gold latches open, and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in blue legal covers. "We have the executed documents here," he said, turning slightly to present them to me. "The acquisition of Sterling Corp was finalized at 4 p.m. today. The transfer of the debt portfolio regarding this property was completed at 4:15. You are now the sole signatory on all relevant assets." He handed me the papers. I took them. They felt heavy, not just with paper and ink, but with the weight of 5 years of silence, 5 years of planning, 5 years of enduring every insult and slight. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "And the other matter," Mr. Henderson's face hardened. He turned his head slightly, casting a cold look back at Gavin, who was still pressed against the wall, pale and trembling. "The forensic accounting team has secured the servers," he reported. "The evidence of embezzlement is comprehensive. We have prepared the termination notice for cause effective immediately, which voids his golden parachute and stock options. The civil suit for recovery of funds has been filed electronically, and per your instruction we have notified the federal authorities. They are expecting a statement." He turned back to me. We are ready to proceed at your command, Madam President. I looked at the papers in my hand. Then I looked up at my family. They were frozen in a tableau of shock. My father Lionel had his hand over his mouth. Beatrice looked like she was having a stroke, her face a mask of incomprehension. But it was Chloe who broke the silence. My sister stepped forward, her red silk dress rustling. She looked at Mr. Henderson, then at the security guards, and finally at me. She looked at the way the powerful white man was deferring to me. She looked at the way I held the documents. Her brain was trying to reject the visual input. It defied everything she had been taught about the world, about me, about herself. President Chloe whispered, her voice shaking. She looked at Mr. Henderson with wide, frantic eyes. Why are you calling her that? She is a freelancer. She is broke. She sleeps in a garage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She is basically the maid. Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. She is nobody. You are making a mistake. She is the help. Mr. Henderson turned to Chloe. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked at her with an expression of profound pity, mixed with distaste. I assure you, madam, I do not make mistakes, Mr. Henderson said coldly. The woman standing before you is the founder and majority shareholder of Aurora Ventures. She is one of the most successful venture capitalists on the East Coast. She is my employer, and more importantly, she is the woman who currently owns the roof over your head. He turned back to me. Shall I have security remove the trespassers now, Madam President? Or would you prefer to handle the eviction personally? I looked at Chloe. The blood had drained from her face completely. The realization was hitting her like a physical blow. The clothes, the coupons, the insults. She realized she had been mocking a lioness while dressed as a gazelle. I looked at Gavin. He slid down the wall, his legs giving out, sitting on the marble floor, in a heap of defeated ambition. No, Arthur, I said, tapping the papers against my hand. Not yet. I think we need to have a little family meeting first. There are some gifts that still need to be exchanged. I walked past Mr. Henderson, past the guards, and into the center of the foyer. The power in the room swirled around me. I wasn't cold anymore. I was the fire, and it was time to burn the house down. The foyer was no longer the entrance to my parents' home. It was a courtroom, and I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, all wrapped in a $5 sweater. I watched the realization wash over them like a tidal wave of ice water. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the sheer kinetic energy of the power shift. For 35 years, I had been the shadow in the corner, the darker sister, the less successful daughter, the one they hid away when company came. But shadows have a way of growing when the sun goes down, and for the Dubois family, it was officially midnight. I took a step forward. My posture had changed. Gone was the slump of the defeated freelancer. Gone was the hesitation of the unwanted guest. I stood with the spine of a woman who carries the weight of empires on her shoulders. I signaled to Arthur with a subtle flick of my wrist. It was a small gesture, a movement so slight it would have been missed by anyone not paying attention, but Arthur moved with the precision of a Swiss watch. He placed the briefcase on the antique entry table, pushing aside a vase of white lilies that my mother had arranged just so. The heavy leather case clicked open, revealing the neatly organized files inside. To my family, it looked like paperwork. To me, it looked like a weapon. Arthur withdrew the first document. It was bound in heavy blue cardstock, stamped with the silver foil logo of Aurora Ventures. He handed it to me. I held it up, not for them to read, but for them to feel its presence. You asked who Aurora Ventures is? I said, my voice filling the cavernous space without echoing. It was calm, level, and devoid of the tremor that used to plague me whenever I spoke to my mother. Aurora is the dawn. It is the new beginning. And for the last 5 years, while you were mocking my freelance work, while you were laughing at my budget car, while you were pitying my small life, I was building it brick by brick. I turned to Gavin. He was still on the floor, his legs splayed out in front of him like a toddler who had fallen down. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet with fear. You thought I was scraping by? I continued walking slowly toward him. You thought I was consulting for mom and pop shops. But the truth is, I specialize in distressed assets. I look for companies that are rotting from the inside out. Companies with weak leadership and inflated valuations. Companies exactly like Sterling Corp. Gavin shook his head a rapid, jerky motion. No, he whispered. That is impossible. Sterling is a titan. We are untouchable. You were untouchable, I corrected him. Until you started bleeding money. I have been watching your quarterly reports for 2 years, Gavin. I saw the cracks before your CEO did. I saw the leverage. I saw the debt. And when the stock dipped last month, I didn't just buy a few shares. I initiated a leveraged buyout of the controlling interest. I dropped the blue folder onto his lap. The sound of it hitting his expensive suit was a dull thud. Congratulations, Gavin, I said, cold as the winter wind. You are looking at your new employer, or rather your former employer. Gavin scrambled to open the folder, his fingers fumbling with the pages. He scanned the lines, his lips moving silently as he read the legalese that spelled out his doom. Acquisition. Majority shareholder. Dominique Dubois. This is real, he stammered, looking up at Richard Sterling on his phone, who was likely still listening on the other end. It is very real, I said. And so is this. I signaled Arthur again. He handed me a second document. This one was thinner, a single sheet of paper with a transcript attached. You see, Gavin, when you came out to the garage tonight to gloat, you made a fatal error. You assumed that because I was poor, I was also stupid. You assumed that because I was silent, I was not listening. You assumed that the laws of consequence did not apply to you because you were wearing a suit and I was wearing a coat from a thrift store. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The recording from the garage began to play again, amplified by the acoustics of the foyer. We shifted some operational costs into capital expenditures. It is called window dressing. By the time they figure it out, I will have cashed out. The sound of his own voice confessing to a felony echoed off the marble walls. It was the soundtrack of his destruction. Gavin turned a color I had never seen on a human being before, a sickly mix of gray and green. You recorded me, he whispered. That is illegal. You can't use that. Actually, I can, I replied, my voice sharp. New York is a one-party consent state, Gavin. As long as one person in the conversation knows it is being recorded, it is admissible in court. And since I was the one recording it, I consented. I took a step closer, towering over him. That recording is currently in the inbox of the SEC, the FBI, and the District Attorney's Office. Along with the forensic audit my team completed this afternoon. You aren't just fired, Gavin. You are indicted. Chloe let out a strangled sob, clutching her husband's shoulder. Indicted, Dom? What does that mean? Is he going to jail? I looked at my sister, the golden child, the princess who had never faced a consequence in her life. Forensic accounting is a precise science, Chloe, I said. Based on the amount he embezzled and the deliberate nature of the fraud, he is looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. And since you are a signatory on the joint accounts where he hid the money, you might want to find a very good lawyer yourself. You are an accessory to money laundering. Chloe screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of terror. She backed away from Gavin as if he were radioactive. I didn't know, she wailed, turning to our mother. Mom, I didn't know. He told me it was a bonus. He told me it was legal. Beatrice was shaking her head back and forth, her eyes unfocused. No, she mumbled. No, this is a mistake. My family is respectable. We are the Dubois family. We do not go to prison. Dominique, stop this. Stop this right now. Tell them it is a joke. Tell them you are playing a game. She lunged toward me, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. Fix it, Dominique! She screamed, shaking me. You have the money now, right? You own the company. So fix it. Make it go away. You can't let your brother-in-law go to jail. What will people say? I looked down at her hands, clutching my sweater, the same hands that had pushed me away for years. the same hands that had pointed me toward the garage. I gently but firmly removed her grip from my arm. "I cannot fix it, Mother," I said. "And I wouldn't even if I could. You wanted him to be successful, right? You wanted him to be a big shot. Well, this is what happens when a small man tries to cast a big shadow. He gets burned." I turned away from her sobbing form and walked toward the fireplace where the family portrait hung. It was a picture taken 5 years ago. I wasn't in it. I had been behind the camera. "And that brings me to the final matter," I said, turning back to face the room. "The house." My father, Lionel, looked up. He was sitting on the stairs, his head in his hands. "Dominique," he said, his voice hoarse. "The notice. Is it real?" I signaled Arthur for the third time. He handed me the final folder. It was thick red and stamped with the seal of the foreclosure court. "The bank has been trying to repossess this house for 6 months, Dad." I said, my voice softening slightly for him, but only slightly. "You stopped paying the mortgage a year ago. You took out a second lien to pay for Chloe's wedding. You took out a third lien to pay for the renovations Beatrice demanded. You are drowning in $3 million of debt on a property worth 2. Lionel nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried to keep up. The bank was going to auction it off next week," I continued. "It would have been a public spectacle. Sheriff's deputies on the lawn, furniture on the street. It would have been the scandal of the decade in Sag Harbor." Beatrice looked up, hope flaring in her eyes. "But you stopped it. You said you own the debt. That means we can stay, right? You are family. You bought it to save us." I looked at her and almost laughed. The audacity of this woman was truly bottomless. Even now, after everything, she still believed she was entitled to my protection. "I bought the debt." "Yes," I said. "I called the bank this morning and offered to buy the non-performing note for cash. They were happy to get it off their books." "So we are safe." Beatrice exhaled, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh, thank God. I knew you were a good girl deep down. We can work out a payment plan. Or maybe, since you are so successful now." She let the sentence hang in the air, implying that I should just absorb the cost as a tribute to her greatness. "I didn't buy the debt to save you, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room like a gunshot. "I bought it so I could be the one to evict you." Beatrice froze. The hope died in her eyes, replaced by absolute horror. "What?" she whispered. "You have 30 days legally," I said. "But since the property is now owned by my holding company, and I have declared it a commercial asset for redevelopment, I am exercising my right to immediate possession due to the breach of contract and the criminal activity conducted on the premises. Namely, Gavin's fraud." I walked over to the table where the box of trash Chloe had given me still sat. "Arthur has the eviction notices ready," I said. "You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. You can take your personal effects. Anything left behind will be donated to charity." "1 hour?" Chloe shrieked. "But it is Christmas Eve. It is a blizzard outside. Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "Maybe you can go to Paris." "Oh wait, you don't have tickets." I picked up the box. The silver wrapping paper glinted under the chandelier. I reached inside and pulled out the stack of fast food coupons Chloe had thought was such a hilarious gift. I walked over to the coffee table where they were all huddled together, a tableau of ruined entitlement. I tossed the coupons onto the table. They scattered like confetti, sliding across the polished wood and landing at Gavin's feet. "I think you are going to need these more than me," I said. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at the coupons with open-mouthed shock. "They are buy one, get one free," I added. "That should help with the legal fees." I turned my back on them, walking toward Arthur. "Authorize the security team to begin the sweep," I said to him. "I want everyone out by midnight." And Arthur, "Yes, Madam President, change the locks. And cut the power to the main house. I don't want to pay for their heating bill any longer than I have to." I heard Beatrice wail behind me, a sound of pure despair. I heard Gavin retching. I heard Chloe sobbing. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel cold. I felt warm. I felt light. I felt like I was finally home. The silence that followed my declaration was shattered by a sound that was pathetic in its intensity. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. Beatrice did not just cry, she disintegrated. The woman who had spent 30 years cultivating an image of ironclad superiority, who had sneered at my hair and my clothes not an hour ago, dissolved into a puddle of terrified chiffon on the marble floor. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, moving with a frantic crab-like energy that was grotesque to watch. She reached out and wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face in the denim of my jeans, the same jeans she had called cheap and trashy moments before. "Oh, Dominique, my baby, my brilliant girl," she wailed, her voice thick with fake hysteria. "I knew it. I always knew you had it in you. Did you think I didn't see your potential? Did you think I was blind?" She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers, ruining the expensive foundation she wore like armor. Her eyes were wide and frantic, searching my face for any crack in the ice, any sign that her manipulation was working. "I was hard on you because I had to be," she sobbed, tightening her grip on my legs as if I were a life raft in a hurricane. "I saw how special you were, Dominique. I saw that you were destined for greatness. I had to push you. I had to be the villain so you could become the hero. It was all for you. Every harsh word, every criticism, it was to toughen you up for the corporate world. Look at you now. You are a shark. You are a queen. And I made you." I looked down at her. I looked at the top of her head where the expensive wig met her forehead. I looked at her hands clutching the fabric of my pants. It was a performance, a masterclass in revisionist history. She was trying to rewrite decades of abuse as a strategic parenting choice. She was trying to claim credit for the very success she had tried to stifle. I didn't say a word. I just let her ramble, let her dig the hole deeper. And the garage, she continued babbling faster now. "That was just a test. I wanted to see if you had the humility, the grit to survive anywhere. And you passed. You passed with flying colors. We can laugh about it now, right? It was just a little family joke, a Christmas prank. Please, Dominique, tell Mr. Henderson to put those papers away. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, baby. You can't throw your own mother out into the snow." Before I could answer, Chloe threw herself into the mix. She didn't kneel. She turned on Gavin with the ferocity of a cornered rat. She shoved him hard in the chest, causing him to topple over from his seated position on the floor. "This is all his fault," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "He made me do it, Dom. He told me to treat you like that. He said you were a loser. He said you were embarrassing us. I wanted to invite you to the table, really I did. But Gavin is so controlling. He is the one who wanted the money. He is the one who opened the accounts in my name." She looked at me, her eyes wide and innocent, practicing the victim face she had perfected since childhood. "I am just a victim here, Dom," she pleaded, walking toward me with her hands out. "I am your little sister. You have to protect me. You can't let me go down for his crimes. I didn't know about the fraud. I didn't know about the embezzlement. I thought he was a genius. I was tricked just like everyone else." Gavin scrambled up from the floor, his face a mask of sheer terror. He looked from Chloe to me, realizing he had no allies left in the room. The arrogance that had defined him for years was gone, replaced by the raw animal fear of a man facing a cage. He didn't stand up. He crawled toward me, ignoring the disgust on Mr. Henderson's face. "Dominique, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't send the files to the FBI. I will pay it back. I will work for free. I will do anything. We can make a deal. I know where other bodies are buried at Sterling Corp. I can be an informant. Just don't ruin my life. I have a reputation. I have a future. I watched them, the three of them. My mother, the architect of my pain, claiming she was my teacher. My sister, the golden child, claiming she was a victim. My brother-in-law, the oppressor, claiming he was a partner. They were a hydra of dysfunction, each head trying to bite the other to survive. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I looked at a balance sheet and saw a company that needed to be liquidated. There was no emotion left to give them. I had spent it all in the garage. I reached down and peeled my mother's fingers off my legs one by one. Her grip was strong, fueled by desperation, but mine was stronger, fueled by justice. I stepped back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional chasm between us. "You are right, Mother," I said, my voice low and even, cutting through their cacophony of excuses. "You did teach me something. You taught me that the world is cold and the only heat you can rely on is the fire you build yourself. But don't you dare stand there and claim you pushed me to greatness. You pushed me toward a cliff. It is only by my own strength that I learned to fly instead of fall." I turned my gaze to Chloe. She froze her hands mid-air. "And you, Chloe," I continued, "you are 32 years old. You are not a child, and you are certainly not a victim." I saw the credit card statements. I saw the text messages between you and Gavin laughing about how easy it was to spend the company's money. You weren't tricked. You were greedy. You liked the lifestyle more than you liked your integrity. You are not an accessory because you were forced. You are an accessory because you were willing. Finally, I looked at Gavin. He was weeping now, snot running down his nose, a pathetic shadow of the man who had toasted to my poverty an hour ago. "And Gavin," I said, "you don't have a future. You traded it for a Porsche and a week in Paris you couldn't afford. You want to make a deal?" The time to make a deal was before you cooked the books of the company I own. Now the only deal you are going to get is a plea bargain if the district attorney is feeling generous. I walked over to the fireplace and looked at the stockings hanging there. There was one for Beatrice, one for Lionel, one for Chloe, one for Gavin. There was no stocking for me. "You banished me to the garage because you said I didn't fit in here," I said, turning back to face them. "You said I wasn't successful enough. You said I was an embarrassment." I looked at Beatrice, who was still sobbing on the floor. "You were right, Mother," I said. "I don't fit in here. I am a builder. You are parasites. I am a leader. You are liars. I don't belong at a table where love is conditional and respect is bought with stolen money." I walked back to Mr. Henderson, who was watching the scene with the impassive judgment of a statue. "Arthur," I said, my voice hardening into steel, "the time for conversation is over." I looked at the gold watch on my wrist. It was a Patek Philippe I kept hidden under my sleeve, another secret they had been too blind to see. "It is now 11 o'clock, I announced. "The eviction notice is effective immediately." Beatrice let out a shriek. "Dominique, no, you can't. It is freezing. Where will we go?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging my shoulders. "And frankly, for the first time in my life, I don't care." I turned to the two large security guards who had been waiting silently by the door. "Escort them out," I ordered, pointing at my family as if they were unruly patrons at a bar. "They have 5 minutes to gather their coats and essential medication. Nothing else. No jewelry, no electronics, no designer bags. Those are assets of the estate now, and they will be liquidated to pay back a fraction of what was stolen." "But my fur coats," Beatrice wailed. "Are staying here," I said, cutting her off. "You can wear the coat you have on. If it is not warm enough, perhaps you can layer it with one of Chloe's old sweaters. I hear they are very high quality." Gavin tried to stand up to protest, but one of the guards stepped forward, his sheer size silencing the smaller man. "Move!" the guard grunted, pointing toward the door. I watched as the reality finally settled in. There would be no reprieve. There would be no miracle. They were leaving. Chloe began to scream incoherently, grabbing her purse only to have it gently but firmly removed from her hand by the second guard. Beatrice was hauled to her feet, her legs barely supporting her. Lionel, my father, stood up slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just looked at me with a profound sadness and nodded. He grabbed his coat and walked toward the door, the only one retaining a shred of dignity. I watched them being herded toward the exit, the heavy oak door that had been slammed in my face so many times. "Wait!" I called out just as they reached the threshold. They all turned hope, flickering in Beatrice's eyes one last time. I walked over to the table and picked up the box of coupons. I shoved them into Gavin's chest. "You forgot your inheritance," I said. Gavin clutched the coupons instinctively. "Get them out of my sight," I said, turning my back on them. I heard the door open. I heard the wind howl. I heard Beatrice crying my name one last time before the heavy wood slammed shut, sealing the silence inside. I stood there in the center of the foyer alone. But it wasn't the lonely feeling of the garage. It was the spacious, liberating feeling of a cage that had finally been broken open. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and expensive lilies, and for the first time the air didn't smell like judgment. It smelled like victory. Arthur cleared his throat gently behind me. "It is done, Madam President. The locks will be changed within the hour." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. I looked around the grand, empty house. It was mine. All of it. The lies were gone. The fakes were gone. And only the truth remained standing tall and unbowed in the center of the room. The walk from the back door of the main house to the detached garage was less than 50 yards, but for my family, it must have felt like a migration across a frozen tundra. I stood in the warmth of the sunroom watching through the French doors as the security guards escorted them out into the blizzard. The scene was a masterpiece of poetic justice, painted in shades of winter white and humiliation. Beatrice was the first to step off the patio and onto the unshoveled path. Her Italian leather heels, bought with money that should have gone to the mortgage, sank immediately into 6 inches of fresh snow. She let out a gasp that was audible even through the double-pane glass, clutching her fur coat around her throat as the wind whipped her expensive wig into a frenzy. Behind her came Chloe, stumbling and weeping, carrying one of the battered duffel bags she had packed for me earlier that day. The irony was so sharp it could cut diamonds. She was dragging the very luggage she had mocked, struggling with the weight of her own cruelty. Gavin brought up the rear, looking small and defeated between the 2 massive security guards. He was clutching the box of coupons to his chest like a holy relic, his knuckles white against the cardboard. He kept looking back at the house, at the warm golden light spilling onto the snow, with the expression of a man who has just been cast out of Eden for eating the forbidden fruit of fraud. I watched them trudge toward the garage structure. It was a dark, looming shape against the night sky, a box of shadows that I knew intimately. I knew exactly what awaited them inside. I knew the smell of damp concrete and old gasoline. I knew the way the draft whistled through the gaps in the window frames. And most satisfyingly of all, I knew the truth about the heater. When they reached the garage door, the guard unlocked it and gestured for them to enter. They huddled in the doorway for a moment, reluctant to cross the threshold, but the biting wind gave them no choice. One by one, they disappeared into the gloom. I turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen island where the security monitor was set up. I had asked Arthur to activate the camera feed in the garage. I told myself it was for security purposes, to ensure they didn't damage my property. But in truth, I needed to see this. I needed to see them realize the magnitude of their lie. On the screen, the grainy black and white footage showed them huddled in the center of the room. Beatrice was frantically flipping the switch on the electric space heater in the corner. I watched her toggle it back and forth, hitting the side of the unit with her palm. "It is not working," I could read her lips saying. "Why is it not working?" She told me there was a heater. I took a sip of water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. The heater hadn't worked since 1998. Beatrice knew that. She had lied to me earlier when she banished me there, claiming it was just temperamental. She had been perfectly content to let her own daughter freeze, relying on a lie to assuage her guilt. Now that same lie was freezing the marrow in her bones. I watched Chloe sit down on the lumpy mattress, pulling her knees to her chest. She was shivering violently. She said something to Gavin, pointing at the heater. Gavin threw his hands up in a gesture of helplessness. He began pacing the small space, his breath coming out in white clouds that were clearly visible on the camera. They were experiencing the reality they had designed for me. The cold was not just a temperature, It was a mirror. It reflected their lack of empathy, their selfishness, their absolute disregard for anyone outside their circle of utility. Now that they were on the outside, the cold was indifferent to their status. It didn't care about Gavin's title or Beatrice's social standing. It just bit. I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see my father Lionel standing in the hallway. He was wearing his heavy wool coat and holding his hat in his hands. He hadn't gone out with them yet. The guards had let him hang back, perhaps sensing the complex dynamic at play. He looked at the monitor, watching his wife and daughter shivering in the gray light of the garage. Then he looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery, filled with a sorrow so deep it looked like physical pain. "You don't have to go, Dad," I said softly. The words hung in the air between us. It was the final olive branch, the last lifeline. "You can stay in the guest room," I continued. "It is warm. There is food. I won't kick you out. You didn't steal the money. You just looked away." Lionel looked at the warm, well-lit kitchen. He looked at the bottle of expensive brandy sitting on the counter. He looked at the comfort he had clung to for so long, at the expense of his integrity. Then he looked back at the screen, where Beatrice was now huddled against Gavin, trying to share body heat. "She is my wife, Dominique," he said, his voice cracking. "She is a monster, Dad," I countered gently. "She has bullied you for 30 years. She drove us into bankruptcy. She treated your daughter like a servant." "I know," he whispered. "I know all of that, and I let her do it. That makes me just as guilty, doesn't it?" He put his hat on, adjusting the brim with trembling fingers. "I can't leave her out there alone," he said. "She wouldn't survive the night. She is not strong like you. You were always the strong one. I think deep down I knew you could handle the cold. But she breaks." He walked toward the back door. His steps were heavy, the gait of a man walking to the gallows. He stopped with his hand on the knob and turned back to me one last time. "I am proud of you, Dominique," he said. "I never said it enough. But I am. You built something real. Don't let this money change you into us." He opened the door and stepped out into the swirling snow. I watched him go. I watched him trudge down the path, his head bowed against the wind. I watched him enter the garage and saw Beatrice look up. I saw her yell at him, probably blaming him for the cold, blaming him for the heater, blaming him for the fact that gravity existed. And I saw him just sit down beside her and wrap his coat around her shoulders. I didn't feel angry at him anymore. I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal. I just felt a heavy final acceptance. He had made his choice. He chose his toxicity because it was familiar. He chose his cage because he was afraid of the wild. I turned off the monitor. I didn't need to watch anymore. The show was over. I walked through the silent house. It was amazing how different the silence felt now. Before, the silence in this house had been oppressive, filled with unsaid criticisms and walking on eggshells. Now it was expansive. It was the silence of a library, or a cathedral, or a bank vault. It was the silence of ownership. I walked into the dining room. The remains of the dinner were still on the table. The turkey carcass, the half-empty wine glasses, the crumpled napkins. It looked like the ruins of a fallen empire. I went to the sideboard where Gavin had set up his bar. I pushed aside the cheap bottles of wine Beatrice had tried to pass off as vintage. I reached to the back behind the mixer, where I knew my father kept his secret stash. I pulled out a dusty bottle. It was a Chateau Margaux 1982, the year I was born. My father had bought it to celebrate my birth, but Beatrice had forbidden him from opening it, saying it was too expensive to waste on a baby. It had sat there for 35 years, waiting for a special occasion that never came. Well, I thought, grabbing a corkscrew. Happy birthday to me. I uncorked the bottle with a satisfying pop. The aroma hit me instantly, rich, earthy, smelling of dark berries and thyme. I didn't grab a wine glass. I grabbed one of the heavy crystal tumblers Gavin had been drinking his scotch from. I rinsed it out in the kitchen sink, scrubbing away his saliva and his DNA, purging his trace from the vessel. I poured the wine. It flowed like dark velvet settling into the glass with a heavy, confident swirl. I walked to the window of the living room, the one that looked out over the backyard. I could see the dark outline of the garage. A faint light flickered in the window, probably the flashlight on someone's phone. They were in there together, stewing in the juices of their own consequences. I raised the glass to my reflection in the window. I saw a woman with braids and dark skin and a sweater that cost $20. But behind that image, I saw the CEO. I saw the survivor. I saw the victor. To the cold, I whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to burn." I took a sip. The wine was complex, bitter at first, but with a long, sweet finish that lingered on the tongue. It tasted like history. It tasted like power. It tasted like freedom. I turned my back on the window and the garage. I walked toward the spiral staircase that led to the master suite. I had a lot of work to do tomorrow. I had to hire a cleaning crew to sanitize the house. I had to meet with the contractors to discuss the renovations. I had to prepare the press release about the acquisition of Sterling Corp., but for tonight I was just going to sleep. I was going to sleep in the master bedroom in the king-sized bed with the Egyptian cotton sheets. I was going to turn the thermostat up to 75 degrees. And I was going to sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who has finally settled all her debts. The skyline of Manhattan glittered before me, a sprawling sea of diamonds that rivaled the jewels worn by the guests filling my living room. It has been exactly 365 days since I sat shivering in an unheated garage in the Hamptons, wrapping a thin blanket around my shoulders to keep from freezing. Tonight, the only chill in the air came from the ice buckets chilling the Dom Perignon, and the atmosphere was thick with the warmth of genuine connection. I stood on the terrace of my penthouse overlooking Central Park, listening to the hum of conversation drifting from the open French doors. This was not a dinner party designed to impress shallow neighbors or secure a loan. It was the inaugural gala for the Phoenix Foundation, a charity I established to provide full-ride scholarships and housing for underprivileged students who had been written off by the system just as I once was. I took a sip of sparkling water. My days of needing wine to numb the pain were long behind me. As I watched a young woman from the Bronx receive a check that would cover her entire medical school tuition, I felt a sense of fulfillment that no corner office or hostile takeover could ever provide. My life had expanded in ways I never dared to dream during those long, lonely years of silence. Aurora Ventures had tripled in value, and my name was now spoken with reverence in the boardrooms that used to ignore me. But the true victory was not the net worth. It was the network of love and loyalty I had built around me. My Aunt Maya was inside laughing with Mr. Henderson. My friends from my days as a waitress were there dressed in gowns I had bought them not as charity, but as a celebration of our shared journey. My phone buzzed in my beaded clutch. I usually ignored it during events, but something made me check. It was a news alert I had set up a year ago, a digital breadcrumb trail I kept to ensure the past stayed buried. Former Sterling Corp executive sentenced to 12 years. I swiped open the article. There was a photo of Gavin. He looked older, gaunt and gray, his once confident smile replaced by the hollow stare of a man who knows he has lost everything. The article detailed his transfer to a medium-security federal facility in upstate New York. It mentioned his divorce, which had been finalized last month. Chloe had not stood by him. The moment the money dried up, so did her devotion. She had abandoned him just as quickly as she had abandoned me, proving that her loyalty was nothing more than a transaction that had bounced. I closed the article. I felt no joy in his suffering, only a distant objective validation of the law of cause and effect. He had built his castle on sand, and the tide had finally come in. The notification also reminded me of the rest of the family. My security team kept tabs on them not because I cared, but because I needed to ensure they never got close enough to hurt me again. The report I received last week painted a picture of bleak, poetic justice. The house in Sag Harbor was gone. It had been sold at auction to a developer who bulldozed it to build a modern glass structure. The physical vessel of their pretension had been wiped from the earth. Beatrice and Chloe were now living in a two-bedroom walk-up in a grimy neighborhood in Queens. It was a far cry from the manicured lawns and country clubs they felt entitled to. My mother, Beatrice, had tried to maintain her social standing, but the circle of high society is viciously efficient at cutting out the cancer of poverty. Her friends had stopped calling the moment the foreclosure sign went up. She spent her days in the small apartment complaining to anyone who would listen about the injustice of it all, clinging to her old fur coat as it slowly molted in the closet. And Chloe, the golden child, the marketing director who couldn't market her way out of a paper bag. The report said she was working at a discount grocery chain. The irony was so precise it felt scripted. She was a cashier scanning coupons for customers who were struggling just as she was. I wondered if she thought of me when she heard the beep of the scanner. I wondered if she remembered the box of burger vouchers she had wrapped in silver paper. I hoped she did. I hoped every discount sticker she peeled was a reminder that kindness is a currency that never devalues, and she had gone bankrupt long ago. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a news alert. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Dominique, please. It is Mom. The heating bill is due, and Chloe's hours got cut. We are so cold. Please, just a few thousand. You have so much. We are family." "Don't you remember Christmas?" I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, after everything, she still tried to weaponize the past. She tried to use the memory of the holiday she ruined to guilt me into funding her denial. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. She just wanted warmth, without ever having provided it. I looked back at the party. I saw the students whose lives were changing tonight. I saw the people who had stood by me when I had nothing. That was my family. Blood was biology, but loyalty was a choice. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to reply with a cutting remark or a lecture. I had said everything I needed to say in the foyer that night. Any response would be a gift of my energy, and she no longer deserved even a second of my time. I tapped the info icon on the screen. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact options. My finger hovered over the word, block caller. "Goodbye, Beatrice," I whispered. I pressed the button. The message disappeared. The connection was severed. It was the final brick in the wall of my peace. I put the phone back in my clutch and snapped it shut. The vibration of the device ceased, replaced by the steady beat of the jazz music playing inside. I walked back into the room. Mr. Henderson saw me coming and raised his glass. The room turned toward me, faces beaming with respect and admiration. I took the microphone from the stand. The room went quiet, not the terrified silence of the dinner table, but the expectant silence of a choir waiting for the conductor. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice strong and clear. "Tonight we are celebrating resilience. We are celebrating the power of second chances." I looked out at the sea of faces, and for a split second I saw my reflection in the glass of the patio door. I saw the woman I had become. "I want to leave you with one thought," I continued. "Many people are afraid of the cold. They fear rejection. They fear being cast out. They fear the garage in the middle of winter." I paused, letting the memory of the freezing air wash over me one last time before releasing it forever. But I have learned that the cold is a teacher. It strips away the unnecessary. It reveals who you truly are. My family taught me how to survive in the cold. They thought it would kill me. They thought I would freeze to death in their shadow. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached my eyes. But they were wrong. Because when you are left out in the cold, you have two choices. You can freeze or you can burn. And thanks to them, I learned how to build my own fire. A fire that burns on success, on integrity, and on the absolute certainty that I am enough. And that is a fire that no snowstorm, no foreclosure, and no betrayal can ever extinguish. I raised my glass. "To the fire," I said. "To the fire," the room echoed back. I drank the water, and it tasted like victory. I stepped down from the stage and walked into the crowd, ready to embrace the warmth of the life I had built, a life that finally belonged entirely to me. This story teaches us that being underestimated is a superpower, not a curse. Dominique's journey proves that your worth is never defined by those who refuse to see it. When family becomes the source of your pain rather than your sanctuary, you have the absolute right to choose your peace over their expectations. The cold didn't break her, it forged her into something unbreakable. True power isn't about shouting the loudest, it's about moving in silence and letting your results speak. We must stop seeking warmth from people who only offer us ice, and instead learn to ignite our own internal fire. If this story of cold revenge and warm victory resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to find your own success? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one.